What would you do if you found yourself in an unknown forest with just a pencil and paper? For the MC, the answer was simple: keep drawing. Art had always been his escape, even when his high school days were filled with obstacles. Despite his parents constantly throwing away his supplies, he'd save every penny to buy more. Drawing wasn't just a hobby, it was his lifeline. Flashback to a moment before he ended up here. Tougo, frustrated but determined, was hunched over oil paints he'd recently bought. His teacher walked in with snacks, a gesture of care Tougo rarely experienced at home. The teacher, aware that Tougo often spent his weekly allowance on art supplies, had brought him mochi, tea, and fresh fruit from his garden to ensure Tougo ate properly. Tougo, however, ignored the snacks. The sight of cherry tomatoes on the table had sparked inspiration, and he began sketching instead. His teacher laughed, reminding him to eat because wasting food is bad, but also remarking on how Tougo's passion for art seemed unstoppable. Unlike the harshness of his parents or school, his teacher gave him a space to create freely. It was the only place where he wasn't judged for pouring his soul into his art. That's why, no matter how many times he's scolded, ridiculed, or had his supplies destroyed, Tougo keeps going. Even if he dies, he will never stop drawing. Moments later, Tougo woke up leaning against a tree, his mind foggy and disoriented. As his senses returned, he realized he was in a dense, mysterious forest, unlike anything he'd ever seen. His high school uniform was still on, but his memory was kinda hazy. Flowers emitted soft light, sunflowers grinned eerily, and giant stone-like mushrooms. This place was bizarre, otherworldly, and nothing made sense. It didn't take long for him to accept the impossible. He must have been transported to another world. Determined to survive, Tougo decided to explore, hoping to find a human settlement or someone to help. But the deeper he ventured into the forest, the more alien the plants became. While some were familiar, like dandelions and violets, most were utterly strange. Hours passed, and his search yielded nothing. No settlement, no water, no fruits, nothing. Hunger gnawed at him, and his gaze landed on the sunflowers. Could he eat them? Before he could try, one of them spoke, warning him it tasted terrible. Stunned, Tougo froze. Talking flowers? That flower was the first being he spoke to since he came to this world. As night fell, the glowing flower provided faint light, and Tougo slumped against a tree, his thoughts drifting. He missed sketching in his notebook during moments like this. Searching his jacket, he found a pencil, eraser, and a few sheets of paper he had stashed away for doodling. Using a flat rock as a surface and the flower's glow for lighting, he began to draw. Even hungry, thirsty, and exhausted, Tougo found comfort in drawing. He sketched the mochi and barley tea he often enjoyed at his teacher's house, but as he admired his work, something impossible happened. The mochi and tea materialized from the paper into reality. His stomach growled, and though his mind struggled to process what had just happened, his body acted on instinct. He grabbed the mochi and took a bite. To his surprise, it tasted incredible. At first, Tougo thought the food he'd drawn was just an illusion, but as he bit into the mochi and sipped the barley tea, the flavors were real, just like the ones his teacher used to give him. He wondered if it was safe to eat, but hunger won the debate. What puzzled him even more was how the copier paper he'd used had somehow reset, as if nothing had happened. Could his drawings really be coming to life? Determined to test it, Tougo sketched the same mochi and barley tea again, and just like before, they materialized right before his eyes. It wasn't a fluke, this was real. That night, he kept drawing the same thing, creating endless mochi and tea until he was full. The next morning, he woke up in the same spot. He fell asleep as soon as he was full with mochi. His mind was racing, his drawings turning into reality was beyond belief, but he was ready to explore its limits. Armed with pencil and paper, he decided to draw something new, this time cherry tomatoes. But nothing happened. He was confused as to why the cherry tomatoes didn't materialize. Then he noticed his pencil had grown dull and tried drawing another pencil to replace it, but that didn't work either. While sharpening his pencil, Tougo couldn't help but wonder about the strange rules governing his newfound ability. So far, only the knife has materialized. The tomato and even the pencil he tried to draw stubbornly refused to appear. Time flew by, and as the noon stretched into the afternoon, he returned to something familiar: Mochi. Once again, the sketch came to life, soft and warm on his plate. As he ate, a thought struck him. He wished for a bed, a futon, or at least a blanket. Anything to make his nights in the open more comfortable. Then his eyes caught sight of a red berry nearby. He smiled, realizing he hadn't seen vibrant colors in what felt like forever. Everything he'd drawn so far was in black and white. That got him thinking. He quickly picked up a stone and crushed the red berry. Tougo finally realized it. His drawings only worked in black and white. That must be the rule. Inspired, he smeared red juice from a crushed berry onto the paper and added the color to his sketch of a cherry tomato. Holding his breath, he watched as it sprang to life, plump and vibrant. It was no illusion, color was the missing key. To materialize a drawing, it needed completion and the right shades. White worked for Mochi, as did the dark hues of barley tea and the knife. But his pencil? It failed because the one he drew was green. A tomato? It needed red. Maybe there were other factors like skill or detail, but Tougo now had the basic rules figured out. The problem was that his resources were limited. He was stuck eating mochi over and over, and he was sick of it. What he really wanted now was something different, like edamame. But more importantly, this strange ability felt like fate, a second chance. No one was here to scold him or drag him down like before. For the first time, Tougo had a goal that was entirely his own, to collect colors and see just how far his art could take him. That night, Tougo sketched a thick blanket. Using just black and white, it came to life effortlessly. Finally, he could sleep comfortably, even if his back still ached. By morning, he'd made up his mind. He drew a simple bag and a plain white shirt. With this setup, he was ready to start his mission, collecting paints. As he walked, Tougo's thoughts wandered. Minerals? Flowers? Could they help create paints? His answer came sooner than expected. He stumbled upon bright red flowers. Crushing the petals with a rock, he hesitated, wondering if it would work. He drew an apple, carefully applying the crimson extract to the sketch. Then he added yellow from flower pollen. After hours of effort, the apple materialized, vivid and real. It was a breakthrough, but also a hassle. 3 hours for one apple? There had to be a better way. That's when inspiration struck. Why not draw paints directly? He sketched a standard color paint and applied the flower's red pigment to the packaging. Holding his breath, he watched as it worked perfectly. The resulting paint was a bit pinkish, but it was efficient and game-changing. With this new method, Tougo began experimenting, using different berries and red clay to create new colors. His world was expanding, one shade at a time. Tougo noticed something frustrating. The paint colors he made were pale. The vibrant red from the bright flowers turned dull no matter what he tried. Layering the dye didn't help either. The moment he completed a drawing, even with the faded red, it materialized instantly. Apparently, if he took too long to add the finishing touches, the sketch would bring itself to life prematurely. He panicked, experimenting tirelessly to find the perfect shade. Then, an unsettling idea struck him, a deep blood-red color. Desperate, Tougo lightly cut his own arm to harvest the pigment. It worked. He finally added a rich crimson red paint to his collection, though the price he paid left him uneasy. With red secured, his next goal was to find yellow and blue, the primary colors he needed to expand his palette. After wandering for hours, he stumbled upon a gigantic lily, so massive he could get inside. Its abundant stamens provided more than enough pollen to create a vibrant yellow dye. With his hands now covered in pollen, he sketched a glass of water to wash up. The glass materialized, and as he cleaned his hands, he realized another problem. He needed a permanent water source, not just a one-off sketch. There were no rivers in sight, so he decided to create one. After scouting for the perfect location, he began an intricate drawing on a rock. capturing every detail from the flowing water to its shimmering reflections. The task consumed him until nightfall, his work illuminated by glowing flowers. Exhausted but satisfied, Tougo fell asleep wrapped in the petals of the giant lily. By the next day, Tougo finally finished his masterpiece, a detailed sketch of the water source he had envisioned. He stood in front of the spot he had carefully prepared, ready for the big moment. But nothing happened. He stared at the empty ground, disappointment creeping in. Just as he began to doubt himself, the image he'd drawn started to move on its own. It shrank and swirled, and then, out of nowhere, the crystal clear spring he imagined appeared right before him. Tougo was stunned. The sight was almost too good to be true. As he stepped closer to the spring, a sudden wave of dizziness hit him. His knees buckled, and before he could make sense of it, he blacked out. When he came to, the water source was still there, glistening in the sunlight. Ignoring the headache pounding in his skull, he crawled to the spring, splashed his face, and gulped down the cool, refreshing water. Relief washed over him as the realization hit. He hadn't had a sip of water since yesterday. Was dehydration the culprit for his fainting? Or did the act of materializing the spring take more out of him than he realized? He didn't have time to ponder further before his stomach growled. Tougo quickly sketched a magnifying glass and used it to focus sunlight on black paper to start a fire. Once the flames caught, he drew a frying pan and a piece of meat, carefully cooking it over the fire. The first bite was satisfying, but something was missing: salt. A quick scribble produced a chunk of rock salt, which he filed down to season his meal. The difference was night and day. With a full stomach and a spring to keep him hydrated, Tougo felt a small sense of triumph. For the next few days, meat would be his mainstay. After finishing his meal, Tougo sat down to examine the paints he'd painstakingly collected: reds from flowers, berries, red clay, and even his own blood, yellows from pollen and clay, blacks from humus, and grays from stone powder. It was a decent collection, but the colors were mostly variations of red, yellow, and brown. What he really wanted was blue, but that felt like chasing a dream. He remembered something about blue being made from a gem called lapis lazuli, a luxury far out of reach. He also needed green. Drawing plants without it felt wrong, and maybe, just maybe, green could substitute for blue in a pinch. Tougo tried grinding leaves, but the beautiful green always turned to an unappealing brown. Frustrated but determined, he held a leaf up to the sunlight. The vibrant color sparked an idea. Splitting the leaf in two, he used lily nectar as glue and applied it to his drawing. He sketched an edamame pod, pressing the natural green onto the image. At first, it felt more like arts and crafts than drawing, but then the impossible happened. The image shimmered and materialized right before his eyes. Tougo couldn't believe it. Excitement bubbled up inside him as he realized the potential of this discovery. If attaching real colors to his drawings worked, he could expand his palette in entirely new ways. He wasted no time testing the method again. When he found a dead butterfly, he carefully extracted the bright orange from its wings. It worked like a charm, producing a vivid orange paint. But before he could bask in his success, the familiar wave of dizziness hit him like a brick. His vision blurred and his head throbbed. Reluctantly, he decided to call it a day. As Tougo cooked eggs and bacon over the fire, his mind buzzed with ideas. Top of the list, get the color blue. But before that, he needed a pencil and some paper. He couldn't draw without the basics. Oh, and a house. Yeah, a house sounded good. Drawing outside all the time was getting old, and honestly, being homeless wasn't exactly a vibe. His thoughts raced with possibilities. There were so many things he wanted to create, so many experiments waiting to happen. The more he thought about it, the bigger his grin got. This joy, this unfiltered freedom to do whatever he wanted, it was intoxicating. Tougo couldn't remember ever feeling this kind of happiness before. Fueled by this new sense of purpose, Tougo sketched a proper sling bag to replace his makeshift one. The satisfaction of crafting something useful, without pressure or expectations, filled him with a quiet kind of bliss. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about doing what felt right for him. By the end of the day, he had built himself a simple tent out of wood and synthetic cloth, a temporary home in the heart of the forest. That night, lying under the shelter he'd created with his own hands, Tougo felt a strange, unshackled peace. This feeling he felt had been suppressed, so from now on, he would let it overflow as much as his happiness this time. It was weird, but it was not a bad feeling. Unbeknownst to him, in the shadows of the forest, a strange creature watched his tent, its silhouette clearly visible in the moonlight. Tougo woke up to the symphony of chirping birds, a rare kind of alarm clock in the middle of nowhere. Groggy but curious, he peeked out of his tent and froze. A massive bird, bigger than anything he'd ever seen, was splashing around in the spring like it owned the place. He couldn't take his eyes off it. The bird's sleek, vibrant feathers shimmered in the morning light. But then their eyes met. 1 second of shared curiosity and the bird was gone, flying off before Tougo could so much as move. "Wow," he muttered, still marveling at the sight. His gaze dropped to the spring, where something unusual floated. It was a feather, huge, elegant, and glowing faintly, as if it held secrets of its own. An artist's urge struck him like lightning. He had to draw that bird, not to bring it to life, but just to capture its beauty on paper. But his inspiration was rudely interrupted by a sour realization. He stank. A week without bathing was doing him no favors. He quickly sketched a set of toiletries, and they materialized in a snap. Armed with soap and fresh water, Tougo braved the icy spring to scrub away the grime. As the chill bit into his skin, his mind wandered to warmer thoughts, specifically a steaming onsen. Someday, he thought, grinning at the idea. Freshly cleaned and dressed in newly drawn clothes, he slung his revamped bag over his shoulder and set off in pursuit of the big bird. The forest teemed with surprises: vibrant flowers, delicate eggshells, and peculiar insects. It struck him how rare it was to see actual animals. No wonder the bird left such an impression. After hours of trekking, Tougo's path led to a colossal tree. Its trunk was impossibly wide, its branches like massive arms reaching for the sky. Perched at its crown was a giant nest, no doubt the bird's home. Tougo's gaze locked on the massive nest nestled high in the towering tree. This has to be it, he thought, sure it belonged to the giant bird he'd seen earlier. Without hesitation, he sketched a ladder, which instantly materialized before him. Slowly, but steadily, he climbed up. When he reached the top, the view took his breath away. A lush, endless forest stretched out beneath him. But what truly caught his attention were the eggs in the nest. They gleamed with a stunning robin's egg blue, the exact color Tougo had been dreaming of for his paints. Excitement bubbled up as he admired the vibrant hue. However, when he gently picked up one of the eggs, a shadow loomed behind him. Tougo turned and froze. The giant bird had returned, its sharp eyes fixed on him. Panicked, he stammered out an apology, carefully putting the egg back. He tried to flee, but the bird wasn't done. Before he could get far, the bird grabbed him with its beak, giving him a solid peck. Tougo flinched, certain he was doomed. But then, something unexpected happened. The bird nudged its eggs toward him, as if encouraging him to hold them. Confused but relieved, Tougo sat still. The bird flew off briefly, but returned with a strange fruit in its beak. It dropped the fruit in front of Tougo, who hesitated before taking a bite. The fruit exploded with an intense, spicy flavor, like a fiery persimmon, sending warmth surging through his body. Despite the strange sensation, it felt oddly invigorating. The bird gently patted Tougo's head with its wing before flying off again. Watching it go, Tougo realized the bird wanted him to care for the eggs. Without thinking, he pulled out a thick blanket, wrapping it around himself and the eggs to keep them warm. What started as a simple quest to draw the bird had taken a surprising turn. Now, cradling the eggs, Tougo felt an unexplainable sense of purpose. The big bird returned, clutching another one of those spicy fruits in its beak. Tougo hesitated, but under the bird's watchful gaze, he ate it anyway, bracing himself for the fiery kick. That night, as he snuggled close to the eggs, the giant bird joined him, settling nearby to sleep. Morning came, and Tougo woke up aching all over, also startled to see the bird towering over him. Before he could fully process it, the bird flew off and soon returned, dropping a bundle of thick, warm clothes at his feet. Puzzled but grateful, Tougo slipped them on, instantly feeling relief as the aches melted away. Another spicy fruit later, Tougo noticed something amazing. The eggs beneath him began to stir. One cracked, then another. A tiny baby bird emerged, its fluffy feathers glistening in the morning light. The hatchling chirped softly and nuzzled against Tougo as if thanking him. For the rest of the day, Tougo marveled at the baby birds and their attentive mother. When all 3 eggs had hatched safely, Tougo knew his job was done. As he prepared to leave, the big bird offered him a gift, a shard of eggshell, shimmering with the same blue that had inspired him, and the cozy clothes he'd grown to appreciate. Tougo waved goodbye, but before descending from the nest, he realized he hadn't completed his drawing. Sitting down, he sketched the heartwarming scene of the mother bird with her hatchlings. As he worked, the bird surprised him with a new fruit. This one sweet and juicy. He realized the spicy fruits had been part of the process, helping to incubate the eggs by raising his body temperature. With his drawing complete and the precious eggshell in hand, Tougo began his journey back. The most important thing was that he managed to get blue paint from the eggshell of a big bird. But along the way, an unsettling sight caught attention. Strange feathers scattered on the forest floor, many streaked with blood. Tougo had come a long way, collecting so many colors despite the challenges. With his sketchbook and powers, he could now draw and create almost anything. Afterward, he got a little carried away near the spring and drew a bunch of plants: peach trees, grapevines, pear trees, even cucumbers, potatoes, and edamame. To his delight and slight regret, they all became real, turning the area into a lush mini-farm. Encouraged by his success, Tougo decided it was time for a proper shelter. First, he sketched a wooden balcony, which materialized just as he'd imagined. The next day, he started drawing a simple house frame. Over the following days, he kept at it, adding walls, a roof, and everything else he needed. By the 5th day, he stood before a cozy wooden house, complete with a simple but welcoming interior. That night, lying on a real bed for the first time since arriving in this world, Tougo felt a mix of emotions. Half a month had passed since he'd been transported here. He wondered if his parents were worried about him and felt a pang of guilt. But more than anything, he missed his teacher, the one person who truly understood him. Unlike most adults, his teacher had always been different, someone Tougo could count on. As he stared at the wooden ceiling, memories of his teacher filled his mind. He whispered an apology to his parents, vowing to one day find a way back, not to Earth, but to see his teacher again. With that thought, he drifted off to sleep, feeling a strange combination of longing and peace. Tougo woke up late the next day, the cozy bed proving far too inviting. Feeling fully recharged, he stepped outside, only to be startled by a massive bird cannonballing into the spring. The big bird, a regular visitor to the spring for its daily bath, flapped its wings wildly, drenching Tougo before he could even think about washing his clothes. Soaked to the bone and shivering, Tougo found himself catching a fever. Wrapped up in his trusty thick blanket, he tried to warm up when suddenly the big bird returned, carrying new clothes in its beak. Tougo blinked in surprise as the bird presented the outfit, a comfy set with a stylish cape that fit perfectly. Grateful, yet baffled, he couldn't help but wonder, where does this bird keep finding these clothes? Once his soaked clothes were finally dry, Tougo got back to what he did best, drawing. The bird had taken over his original spring for its private spa days, so he decided to sketch a new one. This time, he envisioned a smaller man-made spring, complete with a roof and elegant pillars to keep birds out. His pencil flew across the page, and in no time the spring materialized into reality, a sleek marble fountain. Tougo marveled at the new creation, though he admitted the marble's texture still looked a bit rough. But before he could celebrate too much, a wave of exhaustion hit him. Creating big objects always drained his energy, but he suspected the constant flow of water made it even worse. Unlike a simple drink like barley tea or water, the spring was essentially a semi-permanent system generating water endlessly. Still, the effort was worth it. Tougo now had a pristine, bird-free water source for his watercolor paints. The next morning, Tougo woke up to an unexpected sight: a pair of massive white wings reflecting the morning light. Rushing to the window, he spotted the source, a majestic Pegasus, quietly drinking from the spring. But something was wrong. One of its wings was slashed, blood staining its pure white feathers. When their eyes met, Tougo hesitated, then slowly approached the spring. Up close, the Pegasus's injuries were even worse than they'd seemed. Feeling a pang of sympathy, Tougo quickly grabbed his pencil and paper and sketched an ointment jar. With the jar materialized in hand, he cautiously moved closer to help. But the Pegasus flinched and stepped back, its distrust clear. The moment hung awkwardly between them until the Pegasus turned and limped away, disappearing into the forest. The next morning, Tougo woke to find the Pegasus had returned. This time, it was grazing near the spring, but its trembling body made it difficult to reach the grass. Tougo, determined to help, pulled out his brush and drew a fresh patch of grass, lush and easy to eat. The Pegasus froze for a moment, startled, then cautiously ate the newly drawn grass. Watching it eat with ease, Tougo felt a spark of pride. But his mind lingered on the creature's injuries. Could he use his art directly on something that already existed? Fueled by determination, he sketched a detailed drawing of the Pegasus, carefully adding bandages to its slashed wing and injured leg. Holding his breath, he watched as the drawing came to life. The transformation was subtle but stunning. Bandages materialized around the Pegasus's wounds, snug and secure. Tougo stepped out of his house, feeling cheerful as the fresh air greeted him. With laundry in hand, he made his way to the spring, his gaze drifting to the Pegasus resting nearby. It wasn't long before the winged creature noticed him. To Tougo's surprise, the Pegasus approached, its majestic form radiating a quiet trust. Tentatively, he reached out a hand, and for the first time, the Pegasus let him touch its silky mane. This was something out of a dream, a human bonding with a Pegasus. Even though his earlier drawing of the creature wasn't perfect, it had materialized beautifully. Tougo's thoughts buzzed with ideas for improvement, but the presence of the Pegasus consumed his focus. He knew his skills needed practice, and fate seemed to agree. Moments later, another extraordinary visitor arrived. A unicorn, its broken horn glinting faintly in the sunlight, cautiously approached the spring. Tougo watched in awe as the Pegasus seemed to beckon the unicorn over, as if introducing him to a dear friend. The unicorn, however, bore many wounds. Grabbing his sketch pad, Tougo quickly began drawing the injured unicorn. He carefully added bandages, and on a whim, restored its horn in the illustration. When the drawing materialized, the unicorn's reaction was priceless. Its wounds were patched, and its horn, now intact, gleamed brilliantly, even if it was just a prosthetic. The unicorn and Pegasus exchanged looks, their expressions unreadable. Yet, the unicorn seemed content, even pleased, with the restored horn. As Tougo went to bathe in the spring, the unicorn wandered closer, curiosity replacing hesitation. Slowly, Tougo reached out and stroked the unicorn's mane before daring to touch the horn. The moment his fingers brushed it, a wave of warmth surged through him. The horn felt alive, pulsing with a strange energy. Gently, he removed the bandages, revealing that the horn wasn't just some prosthetic. It was real, fully regenerated. Before he could process what he'd just done, a sharp dizziness hit him. His vision blurred, his strength drained, and within moments, Tougo collapsed, unconscious. Tougo jolted awake, startled by a massive bird looming over him. It took him a moment to realize the bird had been keeping him warm with its body while he'd fainted. Grateful, he murmured his thanks before turning to Pegasus and the unicorn, who were still lingering nearby. Curiosity tugged at him as he examined the unicorn's horn again. It was undeniably real, fully regrown thanks to his powers, But this wasn't just another case of materialization. He had restored something. The realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. This was huge. With renewed determination, Tougo decided to restore Pegasus's wings too. Sure, he'd probably pass out again, but the chance to see Pegasus whole and majestic was worth the risk. Grabbing his pencil, he sketched an upgraded Pegasus with both wings intact and gloriously detailed. When the image materialized, the transformation was breathtaking. Pegasus stretched its restored wings, their movement graceful and fluid. Tougo didn't get to enjoy the moment for long. Just as he predicted, he fainted. Again. A week later, Tougo found himself facing an unexpected problem. His once peaceful yard now looked like a full-blown magical zoo. Pegasus and unicorns had been arriving in droves, each bringing their injured friends to him for healing. Tougo spent his days restoring them, fainting over and over, while his makeshift herd occasionally left him gifts like shards of unicorn horns and feathers. Then, as if to thank him, a unicorn gently lifted Tougo onto its back using its horn. Before he could protest, a Pegasus swooped in, and suddenly he was flying alongside the herd. The view was otherworldly, a lush green forest stretching endlessly below, its beauty stealing his breath. It was the first time he'd seen the world from above, and it was nothing short of magical. But the surprises weren't over yet. While bathing and brushing the herd, the horses grew tense, their ears flicking toward the tree line. Sensing something, they all stood on high alert. Tougo followed their gaze, and for the first time since arriving in this world, he saw another human. A teenage boy stood at the edge of the clearing, wide-eyed and frozen in shock. He was clearly stunned by the sight of Tougo surrounded by a yard full of Pegasus and unicorns. For a brief moment, their eyes locked. Tougo and the boy, both stunned in their own ways. The tension broke when the unicorn suddenly aimed its horn at the boy, who froze in fear. Trying to calm things down, he quickly raised his hands and insisted he meant no harm. Then, the boy blurted out something unexpected. He asked if Tougo was the spirit of this place. Tougo was taken aback, staring in disbelief before loudly denying it. His raised voice startled the nearby horses, their deafening whinnies drowning out everything else. The unicorn's aggressive stance made the boy panic even more. Apologizing profusely for disturbing the area, he quickly retreated, convinced Tougo was some forest spirit. It wasn't until later that the boy learned Tougo was human, but he still couldn't figure out if Tougo was a man or a woman. To him, the whole encounter seemed like something out of a sacred legend. He had believed he'd stumbled into a sacred place, and if Tougo were truly a spirit, he would have been doomed. The boy, 𝕝blad Redguard, introduced himself as the second son of the prestigious Redguard family. When Tougo explained he came from another world, 𝕝's confusion gave way to excitement. He had heard stories of people from other worlds appearing in this one, though he had always dismissed them as myths. Now, standing before Tougo, he realized those tales might be real. Grateful for the encounter, 𝕝 warmly welcomed Tougo to his family's forest, and even thanked him for being there. Meanwhile, Tougo couldn't shake the feeling that there was something oddly familiar about 𝕝. For reasons he couldn't quite place, 𝕝 reminded him of his old teacher. 𝕝 started explaining the area, and let's just say his family's territory got the short end of the stick. Sure, it was close to the capital and spanned a large area, but most of that land was a dense, unexplored forest. In truth, their control barely extended to a thin ring around the forest's edge. 𝕝 explained that the forest was believed to belong to spirits, and humans weren't exactly welcomed, let alone allowed to cut down trees or claim land. Hearing this, Tougo couldn't help but ask, "Then why are you even here? A place most people would avoid?" 𝕝's face darkened as he explained. Poachers had been sneaking into the forest, hunting Pegasus feathers and unicorn horns. His voice carried frustration as he demanded if Tougo had seen anything suspicious, even the smallest clue. Tougo thought for a moment, then shared what little he knew. Injured horses had been coming to him, showing off their wounds as if asking for help. But beyond that, there wasn't much, and it was obvious Tougo wasn't connected to the poachers. His skinny frame and lack of muscle made him look incapable of hunting anything. 𝕱 could tell Tougo wasn't the type to handle blood or conflict either. That was a relief, but it didn't solve the problem. 𝕱 let out a heavy sigh. The forest was crawling with Pegasus and unicorns, but finding a specific crime scene in this massive wilderness? Near impossible. To make matters worse, it was getting dark, and 𝕱 sheepishly admitted he'd gotten completely lost. He hesitated before asking Tougo if he could stay the night. Without a word, Tougo pulled out a pencil and a sketchbook and quickly drew something. Before 𝕱 could process it, a sofa materialized out of thin air right in front of him. Blinking in disbelief, 𝕱 slowly laid down on the sofa, his eyes wide with curiosity. "What kind of magic is this?" he asked, unable to hide his excitement. Tougo, looking equally confused, muttered, "Is this really magic?" But 𝕱 was certain. He had never seen magic like this before. 𝕱 pressed for more. Could Tougo summon fire or conjure water? Tougo's blank expression said it all. He couldn't. 𝕱 stared at him, stunned. Tougo, who was curious about the existence of magic in this world, got a slap in the face. It's even rarer to find people who can't do magic in this world. Tougo slumped in defeat, realizing that in this world, he might be missing some pretty basic skills. That night, Tougo lay in his bed, but he seemed restless. He couldn't sleep. He was uneasy when other people were around. He picked up his sketchbook, thinking of drawing 𝕱, but changed his mind. Instead, he doodled a carrot while glancing out the window at the Pegasus and unicorns grazing nearby. The thought of poachers kept gnawing at him. He hoped this mess would be resolved soon. By morning, 𝕱 was munching on the carrot Tougo had drawn. "This is delicious," he said, sharing it with the magical horses. Tougo, who was cutting the carrots, was curious about the spirit that 𝕱 kept mentioning. 𝕱 paused, considering his words. Spirits weren't exactly like humans or animals. "Maybe they're closer to magic itself," he said. Spirits were said to inhabit places like forests and springs, acting as guardians of nature. Most of them didn't like humans, but every now and then they'd help someone they took a liking to. Whimsical, powerful, and rumored to have an otherworldly beauty, spirits were no ordinary beings. As the sun climbed higher, 𝕱 got ready to leave. He thanked Tougo for his hospitality, promising to track down the poachers and ensure the horses stayed safe. Tougo watched him walk away, the first people he had met in this world. Out of nowhere, a big bird swooped down to the spring, clutching a piece of paper in its beak. It dropped the letter in front of Tougo. The language was completely foreign to him, so he pocketed it for now. Moments later, Tougo bundled up in his thick clothes, clearly preparing for something, but one of the unicorns had other plans. With a swift move, it hoisted him onto a Pegasus's back. Before he could protest, the Pegasus bolted, galloping through the dense forest at breakneck speed. The ride was so wild that Tougo clung on for dear life, heart pounding with both fear and confusion. When the Pegasus finally skidded to a halt, Tougo's relief turned to shock. In front of him was a horrifying scene. Several Pegasus were tied up, their majestic wings clipped and their bodies covered in wounds. The poachers nearby were gloating about their lucky catch, already planning to sell the wings for a hefty profit. Tougo froze, his hands trembling as he took in the cruelty. Suddenly, the Pegasus he had ridden lowered him to the ground and deliberately stepped into the poacher's view. The men lit up, delighted at the sight of another Pegasus they could capture. But the horse didn't make it easy. It dodged and resisted, keeping them busy. From a distance, Tougo stared, trying to make sense of it all. Why would the Pegasus bring him here? Why let itself be found? Then it clicked. The Pegasus was buying time, asking for his help. Tougo's panic spiked, but he forced himself to act. Grabbing his pencil and sketchbook, he quickly sketched. He could heal the injured horses, sure, but the real problem was the poachers. They had already caught the Pegasus and were about to clip its wings. The horse neighed desperately, and Tougo felt the weight of its plea. Ignoring his shaking hands and rising stress, Tougo worked furiously, his pencil flying across the page. Finally, he finished the drawing. The poachers tied up, hands and feet bound tightly. Within seconds, the sketch came to life. The ropes materialized, trapping the poachers exactly as he had imagined. Of course, the poachers were confused as to why they were tied up. On the other hand, Tougo quickly ran to the injured horses, promising to treat them all. One of the poachers shouted angrily at Tougo, but now Tougo was so annoyed, ignoring the barbarian. Tougo and the three Pegasus fled deeper into the forest, desperate to escape the poachers. When they finally found a quiet spot, Tougo wasted no time. He pulled out his sketchbook and began drawing, hands trembling but determined. His first sketch brought one Pegasus back to full health. Its wings restored, wounds neatly bandaged. But the effort hit him hard, draining his energy like a leaky faucet. He wasn't done yet. 2 more Pegasus needed him. With a shaky breath, he decided to draw them both at once. The moment his pencil lifted, the sketch materialized perfectly. 2 majestic creatures standing tall, their injuries completely healed. Relief coursed through Tougo, but his victory came with a price. A piercing pain erupted in his chest, unlike anything he'd ever felt. It was as if his heart was being crushed in a vice. Gasping for air, Tougo could barely think, let alone stand. And then things got worse. The poachers, somehow free, stormed toward him, their eyes full of vengeance. The Pegasus moved to shield him, their fierce loyalty only adding fuel to the poachers' greed. The poachers sneered at the sight of Tougo, remarking among themselves that a kid who could control Pegasus must be worth a fortune. Before they could lay a hand on him, a solid punch sent the lead poacher flying. 𝕱 had arrived, his fury blazing like wildfire. His sharp glare burned with fury at the poacher's cruelty. He squared up to face the remaining hunters, but his attention flicked back to check on Tougo. But the excruciating pain left Tougo unable to utter a word, and he collapsed, leaving 𝕱 confused as to what had happened to him. Tougo's senses flickered back to life as he slowly opened his eyes. He found himself lying on the familiar bed in his tiny house. From the window, he noticed something unexpected. Dozens of horses gathered outside, their worry practically palpable. It wasn't just a few, but almost all the Pegasus and unicorns had surrounded his room as if they had been waiting for him for ages. Tougo felt a deep connection with them, a bond that brought warmth to his heart. Despite his weakness, he struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on the wall for support. When he finally opened the door, he found 𝕱 sitting on the balcony, his face clouded with concern. Seeing someone waiting for him like this filled Tougo with an odd sense of happiness. 𝕱 wasted no time explaining. He revealed how Pegasus had helped him bring Tougo back after the near attack by poachers. The good news? 𝕱 had managed to capture the poachers. The bad news? They were now in the town jail, but only on trespassing charges. Without witnesses or solid evidence of poaching, the culprits had denied everything, claiming they were just lost. Tougo's heart sank as the truth dawned on him. While he had healed the Pegasus, their clipped wings were gone. If the poachers had dumped the severed wings somewhere, their crime would remain hidden. The realization crushed him, and regret weighed heavily on his chest. Even so, 𝕱 tried to reassure him, expressing relief that both Tougo and the Pegasus were safe. 𝕱 admitted he had been terrified when Tougo collapsed and hadn't moved for 3 days straight. The mention of Tougo's still posture brought back memories of a friend 𝕱 once saw after casting a large spell. Just then, a unicorn appeared, delicately carrying a peach on its horn. It offered the fruit to Tougo as a gesture of gratitude for saving the horses. Tougo, who hadn't eaten in days, took a bite and was immediately struck by the sweetness. 𝕱 couldn't help but marvel at how sweet the peach was, but his expression turned serious when the topic shifted to the poachers. Without solid evidence of their illegal trade, catching them would be impossible. 𝕱 mentioned a way to uncover proof: digging through the black market. If they could expose it, the entire game would change. Swearing on the name of the Redguard family, 𝕱 promised to make it happen. Tougo, seeing 𝕱's determination, suddenly remembered something. He rummaged through his pocket and pulled out a crumpled letter. Handing it to 𝕱, his eyes widened as he read the contents. The letter contained exactly what they needed: irrefutable proof of the trade in Pegasus feathers and unicorn horns. When Tougo said he got it from a big bird, 𝕱 was stunned, not only by the evidence, but by Tougo's nonchalant mention of the peculiar bird. It seemed unbelievable, but in this strange world, nothing surprised him anymore. That night, Tougo found himself outside, sleeping under the stars with the horses. For some reason, they didn't let him back into the house, surrounding him as if to keep watch. Perhaps they were anxious after everything that had happened. Meanwhile, 𝕱 left with the letter, determined to track down the poachers and bring justice. As Tougo lay under the vast, shimmering night sky, his thoughts drifted. It's so strange that a big bird has evidence. Something was off with that bird. Not only the bird, Tougo felt the world was quite weird. It had been a month since he arrived, and he couldn't help but wonder about his old life back on Earth. If he were still there, he'd likely be grinding away in cram school, with no time for drawing. Yet, staring at the stars, Tougo realized he didn't want to go back. Not really. Still, he couldn't help but miss his teacher. 2 days later, 𝕱 showed up at Tougo's place with good news. He'd caught all the poachers. 𝕱 was quick to point out that it wouldn't have been possible without Tougo's help and the crucial evidence he provided. But instead of feeling proud, Tougo shrank back, convinced he hadn't done much. He believed it was the horses and that odd bird who had truly helped 𝕱, not him. His hands trembled as he confessed how useless he felt. 𝕱 wasn't having it. He gave Tougo a light smack, snapping him out of his self-doubt. He reminded Tougo that if it hadn't been for him, none of the creatures, Pegasus, unicorn, or even that strange bird, would have acted at all. 𝕱 insisted that Tougo had been the key, and for that, he was deeply thankful. Tougo turned red, trying and failing to hide his happiness. Looking to repay Tougo for his help, 𝕱's eyes landed on Tougo's sketchbook. It was a drawing of 𝕱's bracelet. Tougo quickly explained that he didn't draw it because he wanted it. He just admired its beauty. That made 𝕱 think harder. If Tougo could simply draw whatever he desired and make it real, what did he truly want? 𝕱 was determined to give him something meaningful. When asked, Tougo hesitated before stiffly requesting permission to live in this forest. 𝕱 blinked in surprise, then burst out laughing, relieved at how modest Tougo's wish was. He promised to talk to his parents about it. The conversation shifted back to Tougo's drawings, and 𝕱 suddenly had an idea. Could Tougo use his drawing ability to summon beasts? Tougo, completely confused, asked what summoned beasts even were. 𝕱 explained they were magical creatures humans could bond with through contracts. They served as companions in battle, transportation, or even general helpers. However, compatibility and magical aptitude were crucial. 𝕱 also mentioned that while some creatures like dragons existed, many species had gone extinct. Hearing about dragons made Tougo's eyes light up. 𝕱 proudly recounted how the Redguard family's first generation had formed a contract with a legendary red dragon, something most people could only dream of. Tougo, however, wasn't thinking about owning one. Instead, his mind raced with the idea of drawing a dragon. His eyes sparkled with excitement, and it was clear he had found a new goal. 𝕱, watching Tougo's enthusiasm, didn't fully get it, but it seemed Tougo was more thrilled about sketching dragons than actually having one. A few days later, a heavy rainstorm swept through the forest, drenching everything in its path. Under the downpour, a group of hooded figures moved silently among the trees, the leader clutching a strange, glowing pendant. Meanwhile, Tougo sat under the roof of his small house, marveling at the rain, his first time experiencing it in this world. It was peaceful until 𝕱 arrived, soaked to the bone. While drying off, 𝕱 noticed something unusual. The horses now had their own little drums. Tougo explained he had drawn them. Curious, Tougo asked why 𝕱 would come out in such heavy rain. 𝕱 revealed he had some important business nearby and, seeing the storm wouldn't let up, asked to stay the night. As they settled in, 𝕱 couldn't hide his amazement at Tougo's abilities. Tougo had drawn an extra room for guests, complete with a cozy bed. Exhausted, 𝕱 quickly fell asleep, grumbling about how much he hated being caught in the rain. Tougo, on the other hand, loved the quiet, rainy atmosphere. From the balcony, he admired the downpour while reflecting on Ffe's kindness. Despite his busy life, Ffe always made time to visit. Also, Ffe had handed Tougo a formal letter, officially recognizing him as a resident of the forest. Yet, Tougo still didn't know much about Ffe. He learned that Ffe's family governed the entire region. Was Ffe a noble? And if so, how did he always manage to visit so easily? Tougo's thoughts spiraled, especially when he remembered Ffe single-handedly handling those poachers. The peaceful night didn't last. The horses outside began to neigh frantically, their agitation breaking the calm. When Tougo looked out, his heart sank. A group of hooded figures was approaching. At the center was the pendant man from earlier. Without warning, the man grabbed his pendant, and out of it emerged a massive snake formed entirely of water. The creature's presence radiated hostility. Tougo froze in terror. The snake was enormous, and with a flick of its tail, it unleashed a slicing wave of water, obliterating the horse's shelter. As the horses whinnied in discomfort, Tougo realized this must be the summoned beast Ffe had described. The pendant man's voice cut through the rain, praising Tougo for being unusual enough to tame Pegasus and unicorns. But Tougo had no time for flattery. What did these people want with his horses? To his horror, the man revealed his true target. Ffe, the second son of the Red Guard family. Tougo, thinking fast, lied that Ffe wasn't there. The snake didn't buy it. With a quick motion, it coiled tightly around Tougo, squeezing the air from his lungs. The pendant man smirked, claiming he could sense Ffe's presence. Tougo tried another lie, saying Ffe had already left, but it only made the snake's grip tighten. The hooded man pressed on, taunting Tougo. He suggested that Redguard didn't trust Tougo, insisting that if Tougo were truly loyal, he wouldn't hide Ffe's location. Meanwhile, the unicorn tried to charge the snake, but its attacks were useless. It was like stabbing water. Tougo's mind raced as the pendant man toyed with his resolve, using fear and doubt to break him. Tougo was cornered, struggling for air, as the water snake's tail tightened its grip. The hooded man pressed him harder for answers, but Tougo stayed silent, refusing to betray even a hint of information. The snake's suffocating grip made him feel like he was drowning, until Ffe appeared, calm but fearless, ordering the man to let Tougo go. The tension crackled as Ffe, the man's true target, stood his ground. He'd been woken by the commotion outside and wasted no time confronting the intruders. The hooded man mocked Ffe's concern for Tougo, laughing cruelly as he threatened to strangle Tougo right in front of him. Ffe's expression darkened, and with Pegasus, Unicorn, and even the forest spirit on his side, he made it clear he wouldn't allow any harm to come to Tougo. But the man only chuckled, dismissing Ffe's threats. "Avoid unnecessary conflict," he sneered. "Drop your weapons. It's raining and they're useless now." At those words, Tougo watched in confusion as Ffe began removing his pendants, earrings, and bracelets, one by one, throwing them into the nearby spring. Ffe's calm demeanor suggested he had a plan, even as he agreed to go with the man in exchange for Tougo's release. The man agreed, but his cunning nature soon revealed itself. Without warning, the water snake struck, stabbing both Tougo and Ffe simultaneously. The attack was so swift they couldn't react, and before long, they were suffocating within the beast's watery body, their strength fading. As his vision blurred, Tougo felt as if he were being transported somewhere else. He saw his teacher, who asked if he was still obsessing over art, even in a life or death moment like this. The teacher's words were cryptic, but before Tougo could make sense of them, he woke up, his hands and feet bound tightly. Groggy and disoriented, Tougo looked around and saw Ffe lying unconscious beside him. Panicked, he called out until Ffe stirred. The first thing Ffe did was check on Tougo's condition, relieved to find he was unharmed. But their relief was short-lived. They were in a prison, captured by the hooded man and his group. Ffe's eyes burned with quiet fury as he realized their predicament. Apologizing to Tougo, he admitted fault for dragging him into this mess. Tougo brushed it off, reasoning that the group was likely connected to the poachers who had attacked him earlier. "I'm already involved," Tougo said firmly, "so I have a right to know. Who exactly are you?" 𝕱 took a deep breath and began to explain. As Tougo suspected, the hooded men were tied to the poachers. They were part of a black market dealing in rare materials from creatures like Pegasus and Unicorn. When the poachers were exposed, the entire black market operation was at risk, and now they were out for revenge. 𝕱, being their primary target, had been on the run for days. That's when he crossed paths with Tougo. 𝕱 had used Tougo's home as a hideout, frustrated by his own weaknesses. The truth was, his strength wasn't entirely his own, it came from his summoned beasts. Those accessories he tossed into the spring? They housed 4 fire spirits, but the rain made them useless. Without them, 𝕱 couldn't rely on magic or brute strength. He reminded Tougo about how rare it was for someone in this world to lack magic, and 𝕱 was one of those unlucky few. From a young age, he couldn't wield magic or handle a sword, earning him the label of useless. Tougo tried to cheer him up, but before he could say much, 𝕱 crouched down, pulling a knife hidden in his boot. Determined, he vowed to free Tougo and himself from their bindings. With the ropes undone, the real problem was escaping the locked room. 𝕱 asked if Tougo could draw and materialize a key, but without drawing materials or a clear idea of the key's shape, Tougo doubted it was possible. Left with no other option, 𝕱 used his tiny flicker of fire magic to try melting the lock. As 𝕱 struggled, he opened up more. He was part of the Redguard family, descendants of legendary dragon tamers. Their family crest, a dragon, symbolized greatness. But neither 𝕱, his father, nor his brother had ever controlled a dragon. It was nothing but an empty legacy. It's truly pathetic, but dreaming won't cost anything, so 𝕱 will keep trying. Before they could act further, the sound of approaching footsteps forced them to pause. 𝕱 quickly stashed his knife in Tougo's belt as 3 hooded men entered the room. They spotted the loosened ropes and questioned 𝕱, offering freedom in exchange for information. But when one man reached to unlock the cell, he yelped in pain. His hand had touched the searing hot lock 𝕱 had been working on. Seizing the moment, 𝕱 unleashed his fire magic, sending a blazing strike through the cell bars. His kick landed squarely on one of the men, toppling him to the ground. In the chaos, 𝕱 grabbed the keys and freed himself, ready to fight his way out of captivity. The moment 𝕱 staggered out of the prison cell, something sharp and swift sliced across his abdomen, leaving a deep wound. Blood poured out, staining the ground as Tougo froze, too shocked to act. But the nightmare wasn't over. A massive water snake lunged at 𝕱. Weak from blood loss, 𝕱 couldn't dodge in time and was caught in the serpent's crushing grip. Its fangs sank deep into him, making it clear this was no random attack. The man with the pendant stood nearby, orchestrating it all. He didn't want 𝕱 dead, at least not yet. He had plans and needed 𝕱 alive. Tougo, on the other hand, was promised safety, as long as he didn't resist, because he thought the boy might be useful. Paralysis gripped Tougo as 𝕱, battered and bleeding, was dragged away. Back in the prison cell, Tougo sank to the floor, his mind spiraling. Fear pinned him down. He didn't want to hurt. He didn't want to fight. He wanted to stay safe. But then, a memory surfaced. His teacher's words echoed in his mind. "Even on the verge of death, you wouldn't stop drawing, would you?" Tougo's hands trembled as he also remembered 𝕱's encouragement and that warm smile. Something ignited within him, a fire that refused to let him stay idle. Gritting his teeth, he reached for the blood 𝕱 had left on the floor and began to draw. Each stroke felt like a rebellion against despair, a shout into the void that he could still change the impossible, because it is free to dream. But the blood ran out too soon. Desperation took over. Tougo grabbed the knife 𝕱 had given him and without hesitation cut his own hand. Pain blurred his vision, but he kept going. He had to finish the drawing. His teacher was right. He couldn't stop, even if it cost him everything. Finally, with the last of his strength, he completed the image. A red dragon, bold and vivid, its shape etched into the prison floor with blood. Suddenly, Tougo felt a sharp pain in his chest. His limbs grew cold, and sweat poured down his face, but the drawing was gone, or so he thought. When he looked up, a majestic red dragon now stood before him, massive and silent, its gaze fixed on him. Tougo locked eyes with the beast and whispered, "Go, find the one who shares your color. Help him." The dragon lowered its head in acknowledgement, licked Tougo's face as if understanding, and then soared into the skies. High above, the dragon spotted the water snake that had attacked Faye. The snake hurled sharp balls of water with deadly accuracy. But the red dragon countered with a fiery roar that not only destroyed the water ball, but engulfed the serpent in flames, leaving it scorched and lifeless. Meanwhile, in the dim torture chamber, Faye lay weak and confused. The rumble of the battle outside reached his ears just as the dragon burst through the wall. Faye's breath caught as he recognized the creature, the sacred symbol of his family, the red dragon. Staring in awe, Faye couldn't believe his eyes. Back in the cell, Tougo, pale and drained, let out a soft laugh. Even now, with his body failing, he realized one thing. Drawing, even in the worst of times, had never felt more fulfilling. Tougo's eyes fluttered open, his mind groggy. This wasn't his room. As the haze lifted, he noticed Faye sitting beside him, battered and broken, but smiling warmly. Faye, covered in scars and still bleeding through his bandages, asked how Tougo felt. Relieved to see him awake, Faye pulled Tougo into a gentle hug despite his own mangled state. Faye handed him a glass of juice, and when Tougo asked where they were, Faye casually explained that they were at the Redguard family mansion. Togo's jaw dropped. Faye was a real noble, but there wasn't time to dwell on that. Faye's condition was dire. He'd lost an eye and a few fingers and had ribs torn open. Yet, he laughed it off, calling it a small price to pay for survival. His only concern was Tougo's safety. Tougo couldn't help but feel crushed seeing Faye like this, but Faye reassured him. For Faye, it was all worth it as long as Tougo was okay. Then, with a sly grin, Faye called out to someone, or rather, something. The red dragon appeared as a real majestic one. It was Faye's new summoned beast, born from the blood-drawn image that had saved their lives. The dragon had been their savior, decimating the black market thugs and giving Faye and Tougo a chance to escape. Faye still couldn't believe it was real, but there was no doubt in his mind. Tougo had drawn that dragon. Faye's gratitude was genuine, and Tougo felt both proud and bewildered. Yet, as he watched, the dragon seemed smaller. Faye explained it was because his magic wasn't strong enough to sustain its full form, a problem for another day. Before Tougo could process everything, two imposing figures entered the room. One was Vanmilio Redguard, Faye's father and the lord of the territory. The other was Roseth Rufus Redguard, Faye's older brother. Tougo froze. Why were nobles visiting him? But Roseth quickly disarmed his panic, thanking him for saving Faye and apologizing for the trouble Faye had caused. Tougo tried to protest, feeling unworthy of their gratitude after all the help Faye had given him. But Faye's father spoke firmly, calling Faye's wounds a badge of honor. "1 or 2 scars are nothing compared to saving a life," he said. They weren't angry, they were thankful, genuinely glad Tougo was alive too. For Tougo, this warmth was unfamiliar. He wasn't used to people appreciating him so openly, valuing him like this. It was overwhelming in the best way. But the moment had to wait. Tougo needed rest. After all, he'd been unconscious for 10 days. No wonder his body felt like lead. A few days later, Tougo finally regained enough strength to move his body again. His hands felt steady, and all he could think about was returning to the forest. He needed to start drawing. But before he could head out, sparks flared from Faye's bracelet and pendant, and out emerged 2 blazing fire wolves. Faye grinned and introduced them as his summoned beasts. While Tougo had been unconscious, Faye had gone back to the spring to retrieve his accessories. Strangely enough, he found them at the forest entrance, as if some kind bird had kindly delivered them there. Tougo was overjoyed and made a mental note to thank the bird, if he ever met it. The two rode into the forest on 𝐻𝑆's firewolves. When they reached Tougo's house, it was miraculously still intact, with the horses wandering nearby. Spotting him, the horses rushed over, neighing and nudging him like old friends thrilled to see him again. 𝐻𝑆 watched the heartwarming reunion with a smile, but soon prepared to leave. Before 𝐻𝑆 could go, Tougo had one request. He wanted to draw 𝐻𝑆's portrait. Inside the house, 𝐻𝑆 sat in a chair, fidgeting slightly under Tougo's focused gaze. He joked it would have been better if Tougo had drawn him before his injuries. But Tougo insisted. This was the first picture he wanted to draw after coming home. As Tougo worked, 𝐻𝑆 grew curious and peeked at the sketch. To his shock, the drawing didn't show his battered self, but instead a healthy, unscarred version of him. 𝐻𝑆 froze. Was Tougo trying to heal him through art? Tougo admitted he was. If he could heal the horses with his drawings, why not 𝐻𝑆? Without hesitation, 𝐻𝑆 sprang up, borrowed paper and pen, and started writing a letter. He summoned his firebird and explained that he had ordered medicine to restore his fingers, though not his eye, but canceled the order. Why? Because he believed in Tougo's ability to heal him. He informed his parents that he was staying here by letter. His faith in Tougo's gift was unshakable. Inspired by 𝐻𝑆's confidence, Tougo poured his all into the drawing. Morning turned to night, his brush moving tirelessly as he filled the portrait with life. The next day, Tougo hit a block. He couldn't find the perfect colors to bring the portrait to life. 𝐻𝑆 called out to him several times, but was ignored. Tougo was completely absorbed. Then, out of nowhere, the red dragon appeared outside the house. 𝐻𝑆 sheepishly admitted he'd told it to stay at home, but it had decided to visit. Tougo froze as he stared at the dragon, then suddenly let out an excited yell. The dragon's scales held the exact scarlet hue he needed for 𝐻𝑆's eyes. Making paint from scales, Tougo worked furiously to complete the portrait. When he was done, the image of 𝐻𝑆 was breathtaking, every detail alive with color and energy. The moment the painting was finished, 𝐻𝑆 felt an overwhelming surge of power coursing through his body. Meanwhile, Tougo collapsed, completely drained. Whatever magic he had just unleashed, it was unlike anything either of them had experienced before. Moments later, Tougo woke up in the hammock, blinking at the sunlight streaming through the trees. 𝐻𝑆 was right beside him, greeting him with a bright smile and a good morning. 𝐻𝑆 looked completely healed, and the sight filled Tougo with relief. Even more surprising, Tougo noticed his own body felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted. 𝐻𝑆 explained it might be thanks to the magic of Pegasus and Unicorn, who had been nearby all along. Their magical bond with Tougo seemed to work seamlessly, likely because of his natural compatibility with them. Before Tougo could process it all, 𝐻𝑆 dragged him onto one of his firewolves, insisting they ride to his family's residence. As they rode, 𝐻𝑆 broke the formal tone between them. "Stop calling me Redguard," he said, laughing. "We've survived life and death battles together. Just call me 𝐻𝑆." Tougo hesitated, but eventually managed to say 𝐻𝑆's name. It was the first time he'd called someone a best friend, and the words felt unfamiliar, but good. On the way to the Redguard estate, 𝐻𝑆 reminisced about how much had changed. From the red dragon becoming his summoned beast to fulfilling dreams he never thought possible, 𝐻𝑆 now had someone he could trust completely. That person was Tougo, and 𝐻𝑆 felt grateful to have him in his life. Their conversation shifted as 𝐻𝑆 brought up an idea. Could Tougo draw a portrait of his family? 𝐻𝑆's previous portraits had vanished along with his injuries, and he wanted a new one to commemorate this moment. Tougo, caught off guard, was reminded of his old world and the joy he used to find in drawing, particularly the memories of his teacher. Smiling, Tougo agreed. This wasn't just another request, it was a chance to create something meaningful for his newfound friend. Tougo and 𝐻𝑆 soon arrived at the grand Redguard family mansion, where they were warmly welcomed by 𝐻𝑆's father and brother. Roseth and 𝐻𝑆's father had already read in a letter that Tougo was willing to draw a family portrait, a gesture that impressed him. 𝐻𝑆, now fully recovered, was another pleasant surprise for his family. At breakfast, the table was packed with delicious food: crispy, fluffy bread, jams, sausages, and stuffed eggs. For Tougo, it was a feast like no other. He couldn't hide how much he enjoyed the meal, which made 𝐻𝑒 smile and insist he eat more. This, however, sparked curiosity from 𝐻𝑒's father, who wondered if Tougo usually ate so little. 𝐻𝑒 jumped in to explain how Tougo often forgot to eat when he got lost in his drawings, sometimes surviving on just a single piece of fruit. 𝐻𝑒's father, seeing Tougo's passion for art, made an unexpected offer. He wanted Tougo to become the Redguard family's exclusive artist, or, as they called it, a retained artist. 𝐻𝑒 explained further. A retained artist would be paid generously for living expenses, activity funds, and painting commissions. Tougo could even live with the family to ensure his well-being. It was a huge opportunity, but Tougo hesitated. Becoming a retained artist meant turning his love for art into a profession, a dream he'd long feared to chase. Later, as Tougo sat alone by the fountain, memories of his troubled past resurfaced. He recalled a rainy night when he showed up, drenched, at his teacher's house. His teacher, surprised but caring, offered him a warm drink and a towel. With a pained expression, Tougo explained that his family had thrown away all his art supplies after he'd proudly shared his success in art class. He'd been praised, his work chosen for an exhibition, and even encouraged to pursue art school. But his family had crushed his joy, calling his dream a waste of time. His teacher, however, had a different perspective. He told Tougo that not all waste is bad. Some waste, like walking in the rain without purpose, it's really a waste, but there's something to gain. Walking on quiet streets while looking at the rain illuminated by streetlights and feeling the sensation of wet sleeves sticking. It's truly a waste, but it enriches the soul. It's nourishment for the heart, even if society doesn't see its value. Placing a hand over Tougo's chest, his teacher said, "Your heart looks hungry, Tougo. Feed it." Tougo was lost in thought, reliving fragments of his past, when 𝐻𝑒 appeared out of nowhere, startling him. He'd been searching for Tougo all over, only to find him sitting alone in the courtyard. 𝐻𝑒's curiosity got the better of him, and he blurted out a bizarre question. "Is it because your paintings come to life that you can't be an artist?" Tougo didn't want to explain the real reason he was hesitating, so he played along, nodding as if that was the case. 𝐻𝑒 sighed in relief but laughed, saying that kind of problem was like bedwetting. It just needed to be fixed early. Tougo, confused, realized 𝐻𝑒 wasn't being literal. 𝐻𝑒 explained that his magic was leaking, which was why his paintings might materialize. Without missing a beat, 𝐻𝑒 proposed a solution: magical training. Tougo's eyes lit up. He was thrilled at the thought of learning how to draw without his creations popping into existence. They got to work right away. The first step was simple: recognize magic. 𝐻𝑒 handed Tougo a staff with a glowing crystal ball, a tool kids typically used for practice. As soon as Tougo held it, the crystal lit up, shifting colors before the light flowed to his wrist and vanished. 𝐻𝑒 explained that this tool helped visualize the flow of magic. At first, it was just from the hands, but with focus, Tougo would feel it throughout his body. Closing his eyes, Tougo followed 𝐻𝑒's instructions and soon felt an incredible sensation, a flow of magic within and around him. He was so excited by the discovery that he couldn't wait to practice more. That night, in secret, Tougo revisited the exercise, amazed to sense magic beyond himself. By morning, Tougo and 𝐻𝑒 were back in the courtyard for the next challenge, stopping the magic from leaking. 𝐻𝑒 handed him a short wand, explaining that he needed to prevent the glowing light from turning on. It sounded simple, but Tougo quickly found it frustrating, like trying to hold back a curtain in the wind. 𝐻𝑒 stepped in, holding Tougo's wrist to help suppress the magic flow, urging him to endure. But the pressure built, and Tougo's body trembled under the strain. He even cried because he couldn't take it anymore. He had run out of patience. And in the end, with a burst of light that pierced the sky, the wand exploded in his hands. Both of them froze, stunned. 𝐻𝑒 could only marvel at the display, while Tougo stared in shock. 𝐻𝑒 broke the silence with a wry smile, admitting that controlling such immense magic might be harder than they thought. After all, Tougo wasn't just talented, his magical power was off the charts. Tougo's magic, once dormant, had suddenly surged out of control, sending the Red Guard household into a panic. The family quickly summoned a doctor, explaining the alarming situation. Tougo's magical power, which had been non-existent before, was now leaking uncontrollably. Faye, along with their father and brother, hovered anxiously as the doctor began his evaluation. Tougo tried to play it cool, keeping his otherworldly origins a secret. Only the Red Guard family and a few trusted creatures knew the truth about him. As the doctor examined him, he asked if anything unusual had triggered the magic burst, like reading a forbidden spellbook, encountering a spirit, or learning advanced magic. Tougo shook his head, clueless. Then the doctor's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman, chimed in. Had Tougo experienced anything life-threatening lately? An injury, an illness, maybe a brush with monsters? Tougo hesitated, but denied it, sneaking a glance at Faye, who gave him a reassuring shake of the head. The doctor carried out various tests, from monitoring Tougo's heart rate to having him hold a magic wand and wear a strange compass-like necklace. Everyone held their breath as the results came in. But instead of bad news, the doctor hit them with a bombshell. Tougo had so much magic that it rivaled the palace mages. Tougo's rapid growth of magic, recently, then the leakage of magic is certainly a plausible and understandable occurrence. Moreover, the color of the magical power is also wonderful. Tougo will likely be able to use various types of elemental magic. The doctor, visibly impressed, suggested Tougo head to the capital for advanced examination and maybe even join the ranks of the royal magicians. The idea floored Tougo, but Faye's father politely declined. He argued that Tougo needed time to adjust to his sudden surge in magic, and moving to the capital might only make things worse. Though disappointed, the doctor and his assistant respected the decision. Before leaving, they gave Tougo a special sealing tool, a kind of magical dampener to help him regain control. Faye tried to lighten the mood with a teasing remark, but his concern for Tougo was clear. The next day, chaos erupted when Tougo's sealing tool snapped in half. His overwhelming magical power had won the battle. The doctor quickly prescribed a solution: magic stone-type sealing tools. These multi-purpose stones, brimming with magical energy, could do everything from powering lamps to housing summoned beasts, like the earrings Faye used for his own creatures. After the doctor left, Faye decided they needed one of those stones ASAP, but Tougo hesitated, worried about the price tag. Roseth brushed it off, reminding him that thanks to Tougo, the poacher's mess was resolved and Faye was saved. The Red Guard family considered it a well-earned reward, and as nobles, money wasn't an issue. But Tougo had other plans. Instead of leaning on the Red Guards, he picked up his sketchbook and, within moments, had drawn a dazzling gem. To everyone's shock, the gem materialized right off the page. Faye's father and brother were speechless, witnessing this mind-blowing magic for the first time. Their astonishment doubled when a red dragon burst through the window, clearly drawn to the gem's intense magical energy. Faye, ever the joker, quipped that Tougo might become the world's greatest jeweler. Seeing the dragon's eager attachment, Tougo offered to create a custom gem for it. Faye, thrilled, agreed. Tougo got to work, sketching calmly while the red dragon buzzed with excitement. Minutes later, a ruby-like gem materialized, glittering with magic. The dragon nudged the gem, then unraveled its physical form and entered it. Now, the dragon had a cozy new home, and Faye could summon it anytime. Faye thanked Tougo profusely, but his father hesitated, saying the gem was probably worth more than their entire mansion. Tougo brushed off the concern. He didn't care about the gem's value. What mattered was that his creations brought happiness, especially to creatures like the red dragon, which he felt a special bond with. Inspired, Tougo asked if selling his magical jewels could be a way to earn a living. Faye was dumbfounded and said it was up to him. He could probably earn far more than just the basics. Tougo decided to start small, buying daily necessities and groceries. Drawing everything seemed inefficient, and he wanted more variety in their lives. With a plan set, they agreed to head to the city the next day. Faye's father and brother bickered over who'd go with Tougo, but work commitments made the decision easy. Faye would be his companion. The morning kicked off with Tougo putting his skills to work, drawing 3 gems he planned to sell. Faye made sure to remind him not to overdo it because it's unnatural to have a lot of valuable jewelry. Soon after, they arrived at 𝕻𝕬𝕭, a bustling town full of cheerful kids and friendly chatter. Tougo was instantly enchanted by the lively vibe and couldn't stop himself from wanting to sketch every little detail. His fascination grew when Faye explained the intricate patterns etched all over the town, protective magic that uses specific patterns with magical power. You can get a protective effect by drawing the pattern with cheap magic stone powder and embedding a magic stone. In this world, magic stones are practical items for using magic. Their first stop was a jewelry shop marked with a noble's emblem, where the shopkeeper, clearly acquainted with Faye's family, greeted them warmly. Faye casually explained their errand to buy Tougo's sealing tool, which can be equipped with a magic stone, also for appraisal. When Tougo handed over one of his gems for appraisal, the shopkeeper froze in awe. After inspecting the gem with advanced tools, he declared it a masterpiece, so high in quality that even a dragon might be drawn to it. When the shopkeeper wrote down its value, Tougo, who didn't know the value, asked Faye, and the value was enough to live comfortably for 2 to 3 years. Faye explains that magic stones like this are typically a luxury only nobles can afford, as summoned beasts burn through them quickly. With a bitter smile, Faye admitted that he bought abilities with money because he had no talent for magic. Next, they strolled through the town, picking up groceries and grabbing a bite at a local spot. Tougo's reaction to his first meat sandwich was priceless. Pure bliss over the fragrant bread and tender meat, and Faye is happy to introduce good food in the city. Ever practical, Faye suggested updating Tougo's wardrobe, teasing that his current outfit was a bit old-fashioned. Tougo realized that his clothes had been given to him by a big bird, and he decided to go shopping for clothes after this. A quick stop at the clothing store had Tougo trying on new styles and leaving with a fresh look. Their adventure continued with visits to a herbal shop, food stalls, and even some playful moments with the townsfolk. Faye, ever the social butterfly, chatted with residents and entertained kids using his summoned beast, leaving Tougo feeling unexpectedly at peace. With a big smile on his face, today was really enjoyable for him. As they headed home at sunset, something caught Tougo's eye, a mysterious building. When he asked, Faye casually revealed it was a slave introduction agency. Tougo's shock was immediate, but Faye clarified that slavery in this world worked differently. It was more of a social support system for the poor, offering shelter, food, and a chance to earn freedom. Faye felt that Tougo was interested in it and urged him to take a look later. Inside, the cells held a variety of individuals, but at the far end, one figure stood out, a hulking man with a thick beard, countless scars, and an air of quiet intensity. The next day in 𝕻𝕬𝕭, Tougo wasn't sure how to feel about the whole slave thing, but Faye reassured him it wasn't illegal, just a system protected by strict rules in this world. They soon arrived at the slave introduction agency, where an overly eager old manager greeted them with a booming voice and endless enthusiasm. Faye explained that Tougo needed a caretaker/a companion, which touched the manager. Faye apparently wasn't the type of calling someone his best friend often. The old man paraded out slaves one by one, starting with beautiful women. Tougo, however, turned red and squirmed under their gazes. A harem wasn't quite what he had in mind. Faye teased him about missing out on having someone gorgeous take care of his every need. But Tougo was firm. He couldn't relax with someone like that around. The manager tried everything. Mature women, young men, even kids, but none of them clicked with Tougo. Frustrated, Faye asked to see the rest. They entered the deeper sections of the agency, passing cells of rowdy, rough-looking individuals. Faye explained this was the criminal section, slaves with serious baggage. Behind thick iron bars stood rough and menacing figures, but Tougo wasn't fazed. At the farthest cell, a hulking man with a beard like a bear, scars for days, and eyes like steel stared them down. To Faye's horror, Tougo didn't hesitate. He stopped in front of the cell, staring at the man with sparkling eyes. "This one," he said, sounding completely entranced. Faye panicked. "Are you serious? This guy looks like trouble." But Tougo wasn't fazed. His excitement wasn't about the man's past, it was about his physique. "He's perfect," Tougo murmured, already imagining him as the ideal plaster statue model for his drawings. Faye tried reasoning with him. "If you need a model, why not a woman?" But Tougo shook his head, embarrassed. He wasn't ready to study a woman's body up close. His excitement caught Faye completely off guard. Faye, wide-eyed, tried to reason with him. This guy wasn't a caretaker. He was a battle-hardened killer. The man bluntly stated as much, pointing to his tag. 2 murders, sold 7 times in 10 years. His only skills? Fighting and surviving. But Tougo was unwavering, mesmerized by the man's sculpted physique. He didn't see a dangerous criminal. He saw the perfect model for his art, like a living plaster statue. Faye tried one last time to steer Tougo away, but he wasn't listening. He didn't see a dangerous criminal. He saw inspiration. Faye gave up, muttering about Tougo's bizarre taste. Even the manager was surprised by the choice and then made the deal. And so, Tougo walked out with his first ever caretaker, a battle-scarred, no-nonsense ex-convict who had no idea what he was in for. Later at the Grand Red Guard mansion, Faye couldn't hold back his curiosity any longer. "Why didn't you just pick another slave?" he asked Tougo again, almost exasperated. But Togo's mind was made up. He didn't want anyone else, just that man. Faye hesitated before explaining why this was an unusual choice. The man in question wasn't just any slave. He was a criminal slave, marked by the collar around his neck. Still, Tougo didn't flinch. When the man finally appeared, freshly groomed with his hair trimmed and beard shaved, his transformation was striking. His muscular frame was now fully visible, reminding Tougo of the statues of Hercules, or Laocoon. Tougo introduced himself, asking for the man's name, but the answer was unexpected. He didn't have one anymore. Faye quickly picked up on the implication. The man didn't want anyone digging into his past. Faye suggested that Tougo give him a name instead. After a brief pause, inspired by the man's resemblance to those iconic statues, Tougo named him 𝕉𝕄𝑘ūles. Surprisingly, the man seemed to like it. With their introductions complete, Tougo and 𝕉𝕄𝑘ūles set off for the forest, borrowing Faye's summoned beasts for the journey. It didn't take long before they arrived at Tougo's home, a secluded house surrounded by nature. 𝕉𝕄𝑘ūles was taken aback. Wild Pegasus and unicorns roamed freely, not as summoned beasts, but as Tougo's friends, animals he had healed and cared for. Tougo invited 𝕉𝕄𝑘ūles to use the guest room, but the man declined. He wasn't comfortable staying under the same roof as his master, especially given his criminal background. Tougo reassured him, pointing out the special collar that ensured 𝕉𝕄𝑘ūles couldn't harm or disobey him. Still, to ease his concerns, Tougo offered an alternative, a separate house. With a grin, Tougo grabbed his sketchbook and started drawing. 𝕉𝕄𝑘ūles watched in confusion as Tougo worked quickly and with focus. Moments later, the sketch of a simple, cozy wooden house came to life. Literally. The house materialized right before their eyes. 𝕉𝕄𝑘ūles was stunned. When he asked for an explanation, Tougo casually mentioned that this was just something he did often, so 𝕉𝕄𝑘ūles had better get used to it. The big man could only sigh, realizing his new master wasn't exactly ordinary. The morning started like any other for Tougo, lost in his sketching. That is, until the gadget on his wrist chimed, followed by a knock at the door. Opening it, he found 𝕉𝕄𝑘ūles standing there with an apologetic look plastered on his face. The man had overslept and was already bracing himself for punishment. Tougo can't contain his confusion. Oversleeping? Punishment? That wasn't even in his vocabulary, especially since he himself had once slept for 10 days straight. With a casual wave of his hand, he brushed off 𝕉𝕄𝑘ūles' worries and changed the subject, hauling out a massive hunk of meat for their meal. Cutting meat wasn't exactly Tougo's strong suit, so 𝕉𝕄𝑘ūles stepped in to help. The precision and skill in how he handled the knife were almost mesmerizing, as if each slice was a work of art. 𝕬𝕠𝕛 noticed Tougo staring, but didn't seem to mind. Soon, their sandwiches were ready, and the two sat down to eat. Even though Tougo knew he had to consume proper nutrition, 𝕬𝕠𝕛 had no other preferences for meals, and Tougo was fine with that. As they ate, 𝕬𝕠𝕛 broke the silence, asking what his job would be. Tougo explained between bites, taking his time to clarify. His requests were simple: remind him to eat when he got too absorbed in sketching, change the sealing tool daily, and, most importantly, be a model for his drawings. Tougo admitted he wasn't a professional artist, just someone who loved to draw. 𝕬𝕠𝕛 agreed, and after the meal, they got to work. Sitting in a quiet corner of the house, 𝕬𝕠𝕛 struck a pose while Tougo sketched away. The moment should have felt ordinary, but for 𝕬𝕠𝕛 it wasn't. He was used to being treated like a criminal, not a companion. Tougo's kindness and easygoing nature threw him off. He tried to dismiss the unsettling feeling, reminding himself that his sole purpose was to serve as a slave, his punishment for past deeds. But what did 𝕬𝕠𝕛 do in the past? We'll find out later. But as he glanced around at the calm forest life and the strange yet welcoming man who called this place home, something gnawed at him. This was different, almost too different, and it disconcerted him. A few days after that, Tougo's sketching practice was going smoothly. Well, mostly. His biggest challenge wasn't perfecting his strokes, but stopping his drawings from magically materializing. That and the constant interruptions, like when 𝕬𝕠𝕛 suddenly called out to remind him to change the sealing tool. Over the past few days, Tougo had spent a lot of time with 𝕬𝕠𝕛, a man of few words who only addressed him with a curt, "Hey." Tougo didn't push. If 𝕬𝕠𝕛 didn't want to talk, that was fine. At noon, while sketching rabbits in a meadow, they suddenly bolted at the sight of 𝕬𝕠𝕛 approaching and asked if Tougo had eaten lunch. He went to the house and returned to hand Tougo a sandwich, which Tougo devoured enthusiastically. Despite its simplicity, just bread, meat, and cheese, it tasted far better than Tougo's own attempts. Therefore, if Tougo didn't mind, 𝕬𝕠𝕛 would make it and bring it next time. 𝕬𝕠𝕛's routine with Tougo was pretty simple. Besides reminding him to eat and swap out the sealing tool, he spent his days chopping wood in the backyard, hauling water with a bucket, and knocking out workouts like one-arm push-ups and sit-ups. His dedication caught Tougo's attention, who couldn't help but marvel at the man's athleticism. 𝕬𝕠𝕛 shrugged off the praise, explaining that staying sharp was essential. Even a single careless move could be disastrous. The next day, Tougo needed to visit 𝕻's house, so he asked the horses for help. They all eagerly vied for the job, and finally, Tougo chose a winged horned horse, sparking jealousy among the others. An amusing scene unfolded when one Pegasus, notoriously untouchable, allowed 𝕬𝕠𝕛 to pet it. Thanks to his mythical steed, Tougo arrived at the Redguard mansion in record time, with 𝕬𝕠𝕛 in tow. 𝕻 skeptically asked if 𝕬𝕠𝕛 had adjusted to life with Tougo. Though 𝕬𝕠𝕛's response was curt and cold, it was enough to reassure 𝕻. In the living room, the doctor and his assistant were waiting for Tougo's follow-up examination. They checked his heart rate and used magical tools to assess his condition. The results? Tougo's control over his magic had improved significantly, enough that he could begin removing the sealing tools bit by bit. 𝕻 was thrilled at the progress, but the doctor was surprised to learn that Tougo had bought a slave. Assuming 𝕬𝕠𝕛 was meant to be a guard, the doctor was baffled when Tougo casually explained that he was actually a model. The assistant raised an eyebrow, remarking how unusual it was to hire a male model when most chose women. But Tougo seemed perfectly content with his choice, and 𝕻 could only laugh at his friend's eccentricity. That evening, Tougo and 𝕬𝕠𝕛 found themselves dining at the Redguard mansion. After the meal, 𝕻 pulled Tougo aside for a private chat about an upcoming event, a party at the royal castle. 𝕻 wasn't exactly a fan of parties and admitted he wasn't great at them. Tougo, ever laid back, offered to tag along if 𝕻 needed some backup. 𝕻 blinked, surprised but intrigued by the idea. 𝕻 explained the situation, The event was officially labeled as a social gathering of nobles and influential people. Even the king himself was expected to make an appearance. But here's the kicker. Faye wasn't invited as just any member of the Redguard family. No, this invite is specifically named Feyblad Redguard. Why? Well, Faye could only think of one reason, the Red Dragon. Owning such a rare and supposedly extinct creature had put Faye on everyone's radar, especially the nobles and royals, who'd likely use this as an opportunity to push marriage proposals for their daughters, or pull other schemes to claim the dragon. So why bring Tougo? Faye laid it out plainly. He needed an escape route. If Tougo felt unwell or needed a break, Faye could use that as an excuse to slip away from the pressure. And since Tougo wasn't a noble, there was no issue. Merchants often attended these events under noble recommendations. The catch? The party was in 2 days, and it was almost a full day's journey to the capital. Things were moving fast, and trouble seemed inevitable. Before heading out, Faye decided to take care of one crucial detail, sorting out proper outfits for both Tougo and 𝕬𝕗𝕄𝕨. The next day, the trio headed to a clothing store in 𝕬𝕬. While Tougo was busy trying on clothes, 𝕬𝕗𝕄𝕨 turned to Faye and asked if it'd be okay for him to go along. Faye, glad for the help, said it'd be great to have 𝕬𝕗𝕨 as a guard. With the unknowns of the social gathering, it was better to be safe than sorry. Soon, Tougo stepped out of the changing room, and to everyone's surprise, he was wearing a dress. Faye burst out laughing, while 𝕬𝕗𝕨 just stared, thinking Tougo was a woman. Tougo, blushing, quickly explained he was a guy. Faye, still laughing, had to clear things up with the shopkeeper. After some more shopping, Tougo was finally suited up in a proper outfit. With his clothes sorted, they turned their attention to finding 𝕬𝕗𝕨 something formal, then made their way out to capital. With everything ready, the three of them set off for the capital, riding on Faye's summoned beast. Faye found the journey pretty dull, but Tougo was loving it, especially with the fire spirits beneath them, keeping their butts warm. While riding, 𝕬𝕗𝕨 asked a question that made Tougo a little uncomfortable. He wanted to know where Tougo was born. Tougo hesitated, not knowing how to answer. 𝕬𝕗𝕨 couldn't help but wonder. Tougo had never ridden a horse before, didn't know what a woman's dress was, and 𝕬𝕗𝕨 had started to think maybe Tougo had come from a poor background. Before things got too awkward, Faye stepped in and casually explained that Tougo hadn't seen much of the world, which eased the tension. The journey continued peacefully, with occasional breaks to rest and eat. They passed through meadows surrounded by mountains, and Tougo enjoyed the trip, especially the jokes that kept things lighthearted. By evening, they finally arrived at the royal capital's massive entrance, which was far grander than anything in 𝕬𝕬. Faye excitedly pointed out all the great spots in the city that would be perfect for Tougo to draw, which made Tougo's eyes light up. Meanwhile, in an inn somewhere in the capital, a mysterious woman named Chloe sipped her wine, eagerly anticipating tomorrow's party at the royal castle. She had a feeling something extraordinary was about to happen. As Faye, Tougo, and 𝕬𝕗𝕨 entered the capital through its grand gates, Tougo's jaw practically hit the ground. This city was on a whole different level. The streets were alive with late-night shoppers. The air buzzed with energy, and soft glowing lights gave the place an almost magical charm. The sprawling size of the city was nothing compared to the royal castle towering in the distance. Visible even from the entrance, massive, regal, and impossible to miss. Soon, the trio arrived at an extravagant inn, where Faye had already arranged their stay. When Faye opened the door to their room, Tougo and 𝕬𝕗𝕄𝕨 froze in shock. This wasn't just a room, it was a full-blown noble's mansion in disguise. 4 separate bedrooms, stunning decor, and space that defied logic. Something was off, though. From the hallway, there were more doors lined up right next to theirs, yet the rooms were impossibly massive inside. 𝕬𝕗𝕨 voiced the question on everyone's mind, and Faye casually explained. Ancient spatial magic. The magic allowed the rooms to exist in a space far larger than their physical exteriors. Faye then handed each of them a key. Well, more like imprinted the magic pattern from the key onto their palms. Now, entering the room was as simple as waving a hand. The next evening, dressed to impress in formal attire, they headed to the royal castle for the big event. Nobles had already gathered at the entrance, their extravagant outfits matching the opulence of the setting. When the castle doors creaked open, Tougo stepped inside and felt his breath catch. The grand hallway stretched before them, adorned with exquisite art and intricate designs. A particular painting snagged his attention, a striking depiction of knights charging into battle on horseback. Faye noticed his awe and explained it was a portrayal of the tale of the hero and the demon king. The painting's story only deepened Tougo's fascination, but there wasn't much time for sightseeing. As the main room opened, Faye nudged Tougo and whispered a reminder. If things went south, he'd need to fake feeling unwell. Tougo nodded, already feeling the weight of whatever awaited them behind those ornate doors. The moment they stepped into the grand party hall, Tougo was captivated. Glittering chandeliers bathed the room in warm light, and the air buzzed with the hum of noble chatter and the melodies of an expert ensemble. Around him, finely dressed nobles danced gracefully, while others savored decadent treats. It was Tougo's first high society event, and excitement lit up his face. But then, everything else faded from his mind. A blonde woman glided past him on her way to get a drink, her presence impossible to ignore. Her elegant figure and radiant features seemed to freeze Tougo in place, his eyes glued to her as if under a spell. When she noticed his gaze and flashed him a sweet smile, his heart skipped a beat and his cheeks burned red. Faye quickly picked up on Tougo's flustered behavior and teased him. "What's up, Tougo? Love at first sight?" Sheepishly, Tougo admitted it could be, though not in the usual way. He explained it was the same feeling he had when he first met 𝕬𝕗𝕄𝕨. What he truly wanted was to draw her. Faye and 𝕬𝕗𝕄𝕨 shared a confused glance, unsure whether to feel amused or exasperated. Faye joked about Tougo's peculiar priorities. Actually, he was relieved that his friend was showing an interest in women and might be on an adorable path to love. As Tougo tried to steady his emotions, a regal voice called out to Faye. It was the king himself, who greeted Faye formally and apologized for the short notice of the invitation. Faye returned the greeting with practiced decorum, though his curiosity got the better of him. In a sharp tone, he asked why the king had invited him specifically instead of his father or older brother. The king hesitated before admitting he'd heard rumors that Faye had successfully made the legendary red dragon his summoned beast. Intrigued, the king had wanted to see it for himself. With a practiced smile, Faye rubbed the magic stone on his pendant, and in a flash of light, the legendary dragon appeared, letting out a low roar that sent ripples of awe through the hall. The nobles were stunned, whispering in disbelief as the dragon stood beside Faye, docile yet powerful. But the moment the king approached, the dragon's demeanor shifted. Its eyes narrowed, unleashing a deafening roar, shaking the room and causing the king to stop in his tracks. Faye quickly intervened, apologizing for the dragon's behavior before sending it back with a flick of his pendant. Yet, before it disappeared, the dragon's piercing gaze swept the room, its hostility palpable. Faye barely finished apologizing for the dragon's behavior before the king waved it off, his interest only growing. The idea that someone like Faye could tame the legendary red dragon, a mythical beast spoken of only in ancient tales, was enough to spark his fascination. Faye, ever humble, brushed off the praise, insisting the king was giving him too much credit. But then came the moment Faye and the Redguard family had been dreading. The king, with a diplomatic smile, brought up the marriage proposal. He said a man like Faye would make a perfect husband for his daughter, the third princess. Not only would it give the kingdom peace of mind, but it would also strengthen the crown's waning authority. Faye was ready for this. He chuckled politely and dismissed the idea, claiming the princess deserved someone far greater, perhaps a heroic figure from legend, not a simple nobleman like him. When the king leaned forward to press the issue, Tougo stepped in with flawless timing, tugging on Faye's sleeve and feigning discomfort. "I'm not feeling well," he whispered, just loud enough for the king to hear. Feigning concern, 𝕱 seized the opportunity. He apologized and asked the king for permission to step away, citing Tougo's sudden illness. The king reluctantly agreed, and the two retreated from the hall. From a distance, the mysterious blonde woman, wineglass in hand, quietly watched the exchange, her expression unreadable. In the privacy of the restroom, 𝕱 gave Tougo a sly smile and said he did well. "Perfect timing," he praised. Tougo, still uneasy, wondered if they had been too rude to the king. But 𝕱 shrugged it off. "Trust me, the king and those nobles aren't saints either. All they care about is the red dragon," he said. He went on to explain the bigger picture. The royal family, desperate to shore up its declining influence, saw the dragon as a potential symbol of authority. 𝕱 knew exactly why the king wanted to keep the red dragon close. It wasn't just about the princess, it was about control. But 𝕱 had already discussed the risks with his father and brother. No matter what, he wouldn't allow their family's pride, the red dragon, to be reduced to a political pawn. While they were talking, the restroom door creaked open, and there she was, the blonde woman from before. She looked pale, her hand pressed against her temple like she was fighting off a headache. 𝕱 immediately noticed Tougo stealing glances at her and grinned. "Go talk to her," he whispered, nudging Tougo forward. Tougo froze, his face a mix of panic and hesitation. So, as any good friend would, 𝕱 stepped in to save the day. He greeted the woman with a polite smile and apologized for disturbing her break. "Mind if we talk for a moment?" he asked. She shrugged and said she didn't mind if it wasn't too long. The moment was seized, and Tougo was given a playful shove toward the woman by 𝕱. A stumble was made by Tougo, and his throat was nervously cleared. Can you be drawn by me?" was blurted out by him. A blink was given by the woman, her head tilted. "Draw me?" was asked, her confusion evident. 𝕱 told Tougo to explain what he meant to say to make it clear. And so, Tougo introduced himself as a person who likes to draw as a hobby, not a professional artist. 𝕱 added that Tougo was skilled and that he even planned to make Tougo his personal artist someday. Tougo then admitted, in a voice still tinged with nervousness, that when he had first seen her at the venue, he had been struck by how beautiful she was. He confessed that he couldn't stop thinking about her, his heart pounding loudly, describing how she seemed to shine brighter than anyone else. He went on to say that she felt like a living masterpiece, and if he could, he would fill entire sketchbooks with her alone. He even imagined spending days searching for the perfect paint to match her eyes. Though wanting to draw her might be arrogant, but he wanted to draw her so much, and he admitted that it seemed like he fell in love with her at first sight. The room fell silent for a moment. The woman seemed taken aback by his sincerity, and a faint blush crept onto her cheeks. Tougo was the first person like this she had ever met. After taking a moment to compose herself, she told him she would agree to let him draw her, but only on one condition. She explained that her 2-month vacation was starting the next day, and that during that time, she wanted him to take her in. 𝕱 and Tougo froze at the woman's unexpected request. Take her in? What could she possibly mean by that? The woman explained her situation with a mix of urgency and frustration. She worked at the royal castle, but had caught the attention of someone relentlessly troublesome. This person showed up uninvited while she worked, sent enormous bouquets to her workplace, and even ambushed her repeatedly. In short, she was being stalked. It had gotten so bad that she decided to take 2 months off. 𝕱 began to understand, but a troubling thought crossed his mind. If this stalker was so persistent, wouldn't they track her down wherever she went? The woman acknowledged the risk, but was confident that heading to Redguard territory would keep her safe. She said as she looked at 𝕱, the young heir of the Redguard family. 𝕱 was surprised, but that was only natural, since he had shown the red dragon to everyone earlier. After all, he was the talk of the town. The Redguard family already stands out due to their striking appearances. Then, if it's not too much trouble, the woman asks for refuge. In return, she would be happy to model for Tougo's paintings. 𝕱 was ready to fulfill the request, then asked the woman's name. The woman formally introduced herself as 𝕭𝑎, a diplomatic officer, and just like that, the deal was sealed. The Red Guard family would give 𝕭𝑎 refuge and she would become Tougo's model. Later, as they returned to the lively party, Faye caught the hostile gaze of someone glaring at him. The man, clearly seething, called out to Faye rudely and wasted no time addressing the elephant in the room, the Red Dragon. He sneered, questioning how someone like Faye, Red Guard's so-called incompetent second son, could obtain such a legendary creature. Faye corrected him calmly, pointing out that obtained wasn't the right word. The dragon had taken a liking to him, and they'd become friends. The man's face twisted with envy. He scoffed, claiming Faye wasn't worthy, and even suggested he'd be a better match for the dragon. Before the tension could boil over, 𝕬𝕠𝕗 stepped in, his piercing gaze silencing the man instantly. His sharp, intimidating presence sent a clear message: leave or regret it. Overwhelmed by fear, the man fled in terror. The moment passed, but Tougo was still shaken. The man's cruel words lingered in his mind, and he voiced his thoughts to Faye. He reassured him, saying the Red Dragon liked Faye because of his kind, reliable nature. Faye treated the dragon as a companion, not a trophy, and that's why they are together. Hearing this, Faye felt a weight lift from his chest. A smile returned to his face as he realized, once again, how lucky he was to have Tougo as his best friend. After that, the party was over, and heavy rain poured over the capital as Faye, Tougo, and 𝕬𝕠𝕗 returned to the inn, exhausted. Faye silently vowed to avoid parties for a while. They were just too draining. Still, the night wasn't a total waste. They'd met 𝕭𝑎, who agreed to be Tougo's model. As they settled in, 𝕬𝕠𝕗, who had apparently missed the memo, asked if Tougo had bought slaves. Faye quickly clarified that Tougo had hired a woman for a specific purpose. Watching Tougo eagerly preparing to sketch made 𝕬𝕠𝕗 pause. Is this guy always like this? All he thinks about is drawing? His bluntness left Tougo looking deflated and apologetic. 𝕬𝕠𝕗, realizing he might have come off harsh, reassured him. I'm not blaming you, he said. It's just surprising. Honestly, being lost in art is way better than being consumed by darker things. Then he asked almost curiously, do you really see the world as that beautiful? Tougo nodded and turned to the rain-soaked window. Look outside, he said softly. The city in the rain. Isn't it beautiful? I love how, under streetlights, it looks like the light itself is falling. His sincerity caught 𝕬𝕠𝕗 off guard, and with a nod, he agreed. It was beautiful. Their quiet moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. When they opened it, 𝕭𝑎 stood there, soaked to the bone. The three of them blinked in shock. Why was she here so late, and in this state? 𝕭𝑎 explained that a stalker had been waiting near her house, so she couldn't go home and had nowhere else to turn. Faye quickly ushered her inside, insisting she take a hot bath and warm up. While she was in the bath, they faced a problem. No clothes for her to change into. Tougo, ever the creative, suggested sketching something for her, but 𝕬𝕠𝕗 shot down the idea, warning about the potential risks if someone found out about Tougo's too convenient talent. Faye agreed. It wasn't that they doubted 𝕭𝑎, but her job at the royal castle came with unknown complications. After some brainstorming, they remembered the roomwear the inn provided, which Faye had never used because it didn't fit him. 𝕬𝕠𝕗 suggested they give it to 𝕭𝑎 while he handled the more delicate issue, finding some appropriate undergarments at the front desk. After all, this was a noble's inn. Surely they had something suitable. Watching 𝕬𝕠𝕗 handle the situation with calm efficiency, Tougo and Faye exchanged a silent agreement. A man who stays composed and unfazed in tricky situations is truly admirable. The next morning, 𝕭𝑎 was still wearing the room clothes they'd lent her, so Faye decided to take her shopping for some proper ones. 𝕭𝑎 hesitated, feeling bad about the gesture, but Faye waved her concerns away and called it her modeling fee. He even offered to buy her anything else she wanted. Thrilled, 𝕭𝑎 mentioned a brand of tea that was only available in the royal city and asked if they'd come with her to pick it up. Meanwhile, Tougo trailed behind, lost in thought. 𝕉's words from last night about 𝔻𝑣 working at the royal castle kept nagging at him. What kind of complications might that bring? Still, after 𝔻𝑣 picked out her clothes, they all headed to the tea shop together. On the way, 𝔻𝑣 stopped abruptly in front of a shop, catching Tougo's attention. Curious, he asked what had caught her eye. She was staring at a display of knives in a pawn shop window and wondered aloud if they might need something like that. 𝕉 said that a bulky weapon didn't exactly suit her slender frame. When 𝕉 turned to 𝕰𝕠𝕗 for his opinion, he noticed the man was frozen, staring at a big sword on display. Concerned, 𝕉 and Tougo called out to him, snapping him out of his daze. 𝕰𝕠𝕗 apologized, blaming it on daydreaming, but Tougo wasn't buying it. Pressing him, Tougo asked if he wanted the sword. 𝕰𝕠𝕗 shook his head and denied it, but his hesitation was obvious. Tougo couldn't let it go. Was money the issue, or was it something deeper? After a long pause, 𝕰𝕠𝕗 admitted that he couldn't spend money because he was a slave and didn't feel worthy of owning that sword. Tougo, undeterred, offered to pay for it himself. If the funds weren't enough, he'd sell some gems to cover the cost. 𝕰𝕠𝕗 looked stunned, asking why Tougo was willing to go to such lengths. Tougo's answer was simple. He thinks the sword is suited for 𝕰𝕗𝕗. Then, with a steady look, he asked, "Wasn't this originally your sword?" 𝕰𝕗𝕗's eyes widened, his silence giving him away. 𝕉, just as shocked, demanded an explanation. With a heavy sigh, 𝕰𝕗𝕗 began to tell his story. He once served a lord in the 𝕉𝕑 territory, and that sword had been a gift from his master. But with that same sword, he'd killed 2 people. One was an innocent civilian, and the other was the new lord, who took over after his master's death. Those actions marked him as a criminal slave. The sword had been taken from him, and with it, his past had been buried. When 𝕰𝕗𝕗 finished his story, Tougo's expression softened. He saw it as fate. They'd stumbled upon something precious that had been lost. Without hesitation, Tougo marched into the pawn shop to buy the sword. But before he could get far, 𝕰𝕗𝕗 panicked, stopping him in his tracks. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Why go so far for someone like me?" Tougo hesitated, unsure how to explain. He admitted he didn't really grasp the concept of slavery, but one thing he did know: seeing the people around him happy made him happy too. He also understood the heartbreak of losing something dear and the joy of reclaiming it. Despite Tougo's sincerity, 𝕰𝕗𝕗 stood frozen, his body trembling. He still couldn't believe he was worthy of the sword. That's when 𝕉 stepped in, pulling a bold move by telling the shopkeeper to hand over the sword. The old man hesitated, explaining that it was no ordinary blade. It was a meteorite sword and would cost a fortune. But Tougo didn't care. He was ready to pay. 𝕉 tried to lighten the mood, urging 𝕰𝕗𝕗 to take it and worry about everything else later. Tougo wasn't backing down either. A few moments later, Tougo stumbled out of the shop, struggling under the sword's weight. 𝕰𝕗𝕗 stared at the blade, a storm of emotion swirling inside him. Why would Tougo do this for a slave? He finally voiced his doubts, asking, "What if I kill someone with it again?" Tougo, unshaken, told him he wasn't worried. "You're not that kind of person," he said simply. "I know it because even when you walk through the forest, you're careful not to step on flowers. The horses also trust you, and you train constantly because you know how much harm a careless movement could cause. That sword belongs in your hands." Tougo didn't press 𝕰𝕗𝕗 about his past, admitting he had his own secrets too. But he assured him that he could feel his regret and his unspoken desire to wield the sword again. 𝕉 chimed in, adding that 𝕰𝕗𝕗 didn't have a choice now. "We already bought it," he teased. "Besides, we're going to need you. From now on, you'll be Tougo's bodyguard. Trouble's bound to find us sooner or later, and honestly, we're not equipped to handle it alone." 𝕰𝕗𝕗 hesitated, his past weighing heavily on him. He thought about Tougo's praise, how he'd called his hands beautiful when holding the knife despite everything, and 𝕉's unwavering trust. He realized that being a criminal slave was his punishment, but this was also his chance to make amends. With newfound resolve, 𝕰𝕗𝕗 knelt before Tougo, accepting the sword with the grace of a royal knight. He will fulfill the role that has been bestowed upon him, and he swore to protect Tougo as his second master, and of course, as a model too. Right on cue, 𝕭oa returned from the tea shop, stumbling awkwardly into the touching moment. But yeah, that's how 𝕬𝕗𝕄's new story begins. A few days later, in the forest, Tougo was busy sketching 𝕬𝕗𝕄, who stood posing with a sword. The two agreed, the sword was something special. After a while, Tougo nailed the drawing and asked how the sword felt in 𝕬𝕗𝕄's hands. 𝕬𝕗𝕄 hesitated. He still wasn't sure if it was okay for him to wield it again, but he was determined to fulfill his role as Tougo's bodyguard. Tougo's face lit up at that response. Speaking of which, Tougo suddenly remembered. It was time to draw 𝕭oa. They headed to 𝕭𝕬lia's inn, where 𝕭oa had been staying. She greeted them warmly and invited them inside. 𝕭oa loved her stay there. It had been ages since she'd felt so relaxed. Plus, the town of 𝕭𝕬lia never got old, even after a whole week. Tougo, however, felt a bit guilty about showing up daily with 𝕬𝕗𝕄. But 𝕭oa quickly reassured him, saying she was happy to have them around. Being cooped up made her feel down, so she hoped they'd keep visiting. After brewing some tea, 𝕭oa got ready for her portrait session. Tougo dove right in, sketching her radiant smile. As he worked, 𝕭oa grew curious and asked, "Don't you ever get tired of drawing every day?" Tougo froze, blinking in confusion. Tired? What even is that? 𝕬𝕗𝕄 chimed in, explaining that Tougo loved drawing so much, he even sketched 𝕬𝕗𝕄's daily without complaint. That passion wasn't lost on 𝕭oa. She could see just how much art meant to Tougo. The conversation shifted when 𝕭oa mentioned that Tougo wanted to be a full-time artist. Tougo flinched at the words, his expression darkening. That wasn't something he'd ever said. It was Faye's idea, not his. Doubt crept in as Tougo thought about it. Could he really make a living from art? Memories of the past and lingering trauma weighed him down. Noticing his shift in mood, 𝕭oa reached out and pulled him into a warm hug, her hands gentle but firm. Tougo froze, blushing furiously, while 𝕭oa just laughed. She asked if he felt better now, and surprisingly, he did. Her embrace worked like magic, calming his nerves. 𝕭oa smiled, glad to help. "Having something you love is a wonderful thing," she said, watching him draw with admiration. Her words piqued Tougo's curiosity. "Do you have a hobby?" he asked. 𝕭oa thought for a moment before answering. "I wouldn't call it a hobby, but I do love shopping." She chuckled, then added, "If anything, I'm good at making tea." She offered Tougo a refill, and as he sipped the freshly brewed tea, he could feel the warmth spreading through him. The next morning, as Tougo was getting ready to head to 𝕭oa's place, a firebird spirit from Faye appeared, carrying a letter in its beak. Curious but unable to read it, Tougo handed it over to 𝕬𝕗𝕄. The letter was brief and to the point. "𝕭oa has come to seek shelter with us. Tougo, you and the others come over." Realizing things were serious, they hurried to the Redguard mansion. At the mansion, Faye greeted them with a serious expression and quickly led them to a room. Inside, they found 𝕭oa, looking deeply worried. The moment she saw Tougo, she rushed to hug him, as if just seeing him was a relief. Tougo gently asked her what had happened, and Faye explained with a sigh. Apparently, 𝕭oa's stalker had found her at the inn that morning. The doorbell rang, and when she opened it, he was there. Thankfully, she managed to escape and ran to the mansion for safety, as she'd assumed Tougo lived there too. Faye suggested moving 𝕭oa somewhere safer, possibly letting her stay at the Redguard mansion. But Tougo had another idea. "Why not let her stay at my house?" he offered. 𝕭oa was caught off guard by the suggestion, but Faye thought it was a smart move. Tougo's home was deep in the forest, secluded and hard for just anyone to find. 𝕬𝕗𝕄 agreed, though his cautious expression hinted at lingering doubts. It didn't take long for the decision to be made. Faye asked 𝕭oa to stay with Tougo, and soon the three of them arrived at Tougo's place. 𝕭oa froze for a moment, amazed by what she saw. Hidden in the forest was a charming wooden house surrounded by Pegasus and unicorns. She didn't expect a place like this to exist, but her surprise quickly turned to delight as the horses approached her. They even let her pet them. While 𝐻loa was preoccupied with the horses, Leokules leaned close to Tougo and whispered his plans. He'd also be staying nearby for a while, to protect 𝐻loa, of course. He warned Tougo to remain cautious about her, just in case anything unexpected happened. Tougo nodded in agreement and excused himself to tidy up the house and prepare a guest room for 𝐻loa. Moments later, loud noises erupted inside the house. Banging, scraping, and who knows what. 𝐻loa exchanged a concerned glance with Leokules, wondering what was going on in there. Finally, Tougo emerged, invited 𝐻loa inside, and unveiled the freshly made guest room. In true Tougo fashion, it was as if the room had been thrown together in the blink of an eye. Complete with scribbles and sketches brought to life, 𝐻loa was thrilled with her new space, but Leokules couldn't help but feel uneasy about Tougo's eerie ability to create a whole room so quickly. Still, with the immediate danger seemingly behind them, 𝐻loa relaxed, removed her outerwear, and suggested they get back to drawing. Tougo, as always, was more than ready, and so their days together began, filled with art, laughter, and the faint tension of keeping one eye on the horizon for trouble. A few days later, they were making their way through the forest, with 𝐻loa riding a horse that had somehow won Pegasus's trust. The day was vibrant. Flowers were blooming everywhere, and the horse seemed to know the perfect spot to take them. When they arrived at the serene clearing, Tougo casually suggested that 𝐻loa should try doing some forest-like things. Forest-like? 𝐻loa asked, puzzled. Tougo explained his dilemma. Every time he tried drawing 𝐻loa in the forest, the scenery was stunning, but something felt off. Then it hit him. 𝐻loa didn't quite match the forest vibe. To him, she belonged in castles or at grand parties, places where her elegance truly shone. After all, she used to work at the royal palace, so it made sense. But maybe, he thought, if she tried embracing the forest more, he could capture her in a way that fit this environment. As if on cue, Tougo spotted a butterfly and pointed it out. Its wings were a striking, deep black, simple yet mesmerizing. He then led them to a vibrant flower, remarking that its color reminded him of Leokules' eyes. When it came to comparing the color of 𝐻loa's eyes, though, Tougo paused, looked around, and finally raised his hand toward the sky above. They all glanced up, where beams of soft sunlight filtered through the lush green leaves. "That," Tougo said with a smile, "that's the color of your eyes." Of course, she is beautiful in every way, but Tougo really thinks that her eyes are especially beautiful. 𝐻loa was stunned. She stared silently at the glowing light, her cheeks flushing. It was the first time anyone had complimented her eyes like that. Tougo, seemingly unaware of the effect his words had, called her over to look at a bright red fruit hanging from a nearby tree. He explained that this fruit was the first red he'd ever used in his forest drawings. Curious, he wondered aloud if it was safe to eat, but admitted he wasn't sure if it was poisonous. 𝐻loa laughed softly, breaking her silence. "It's not poisonous," she assured him. "But it's not tasty either. I ate it when I was a kid." Taking her word for it, Tougo popped the fruit into his mouth and immediately made a face. 𝐻loa couldn't help but giggle. She'd warned him it wasn't good, but seeing his reaction was still amusing. Despite the awful taste, Tougo waved it off. "Even eating something not tasty is probably food for the heart," he said with a grin. 𝐻loa tilted her head, confused. So Tougo explained further. His teacher had once told him that even things that seemed pointless were necessary for the soul. It's what helped people grow. That simple wisdom struck a chord with 𝐻loa. She found herself quietly admiring Tougo. Tougo decided to take the red fruit home, not to eat, but to make paint out of it. 𝐻loa couldn't help but question him. Didn't he already have enough beautiful shades of red? She didn't understand his reasoning, but that was just Tougo, finding meaning in things that seemed pointless. "It's food for the heart," he explained casually. Leokules, observing the growing paint collection, chimed in, noting how Tougo's paints kept piling up like that. Tougo just grinned. "Even the unnecessary can be necessary," he said, leaving 𝐻loa scratching her head. Finally, Tougo elaborated. There's a waste you can afford to lose, and there's waste you can't. Things like gazing at the sky because it's beautiful, wondering about the taste of a strange fruit, or taking a stroll for no reason at all. Those aren't truly waste. They're the kind of useless things that feed the soul. Our hearts live off that kind of waste, he said. Drawing food doesn't fill your stomach, but it nourishes the heart. Without it, his heart would surely wither away. Tougo's words cracked open something in 𝑘𝓄𝑚, a window she didn't even realize was closed. His way of thinking was beautiful, and it made her see him in a new light. A wonderful young man, shaped by a wise teacher. A small pang of jealousy stirred in her, wishing she had learned the same lessons. They continued their journey, eventually arriving at a sprawling field of flowers. Tougo's cheerful personality filled the air, and 𝑘𝓄𝑚 found herself noticing how his presence was slowly changing her. The wistfulness in her eyes began to fade, replaced by a quiet sense of hope. They spent the day making flower crowns, a simple act that soothed her heart in ways she hadn't expected. Evenings were filled with shared meals and warm laughter. Mornings brought the big bird to the spring, a loyal companion as they washed clothes. Later in the day, Tougo would sit down to draw 𝑘𝓄𝑚 in the forest, his concentration unmatched. One day, Faye stopped by with a gift, a dress as stunning as 𝑘𝓄𝑚 herself. Tougo wasted no time painting her cheerful expression, but something deeper lingered in her gaze, a meaning he couldn't quite place. That night, as Tougo was deeply immersed in his drawing, 𝑘𝓄𝑚 stopped by to watch him. There was something about the way he enjoyed his craft, so focused and alive, that made her blush. Gathering her courage, she stepped closer, a playful smirk forming on her lips, and offered him something. Something just a little naughty. What happens next? Well, I'm not spilling all the details, for the safety of my channel of course, but hey, you can always check out the manga yourself. Okay, to sum it up, 𝑘𝓄𝑚, being her bold self, decided to playfully seduce Tougo into drawing her. The two ended up working on that picture late in the early hours of the morning. But don't get the wrong idea, Tougo wasn't fazed. He thought the whole thing was educational, and stayed laser-focused on sketching her. The next day, Tougo woke up, sketchbook still clutched in his hand. He blinked groggily, only to glance over at the bed and spot 𝑘𝓄𝑚 still asleep there. Why on earth was she in his room? Confused, he flipped through his sketchbook, and sure enough, page after page was filled with drawings of her. Tougo was in a daze, unsure of what to make of the situation. He carefully covered 𝑘𝓄𝑚 with a blanket and slipped out of the house, trying to clear his head. Outside, 𝕬𝕗𝕘𝕐 was already there, greeting him with a knowing look. Apparently, 𝕬𝕗𝕘𝕐 had seen 𝑘𝓄𝑚 sneak into Tougo's room the night before and had kept watch through the window the whole time. Awkward, right? Tougo fumbled to explain, but 𝕬𝕗𝕐𝕐, surprisingly chill, didn't judge him at all. But something was off. 𝑘𝓄𝑚 hadn't woken up yet, which was unusual since she was always up early. Faye arrived moments later, visibly panicked when he heard she was still asleep. By now, they had moved her to a hammock, but it was well past noon, and she was still out cold. Faye quickly examined her and immediately noticed the symptoms of magical exhaustion. 𝕬𝕗𝕐𝕐 seemed to pick up on it too. For now, the Pegasuses were sharing their magical power to stabilize her, but the big question remained, what caused this? Faye asked Tougo if he knew what kind of magic 𝑘𝓄𝑚 had been using. Tougo, still rattled, admitted he didn't have a clue. He'd been so laser-focused on drawing her the night before that everything else was a blur. In fact, he didn't remember much at all, just drawing endlessly, feeling hazy and feverish, and then waking up in the morning. Faye raised an eyebrow and asked a rather personal question. Had Tougo ever experienced anything like this with a woman before? Tougo, flustered, confirmed he hadn't. That's when Faye dropped the bombshell. Tougo might be under a charm spell. Charm spells are ancient magic designed to make the target infatuated with someone. Listening to Tougo's account, it all added up. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces clicked into place for Tougo. He remembered feeling strangely captivated by 𝑘𝓄𝑚 the first time he saw her at the royal castle party. Faye admitted he found it odd too. Innocent, oblivious Tougo, smitten out of nowhere? Suspicious. 𝕻 explained that charm spells work by locking eyes with the target, and Tougo confessed he had looked into 𝕭oa's eyes more than a few times. With that, the truth was undeniable. 𝕭oa had charmed Tougo, and if that wasn't alarming enough, it meant she had been plotting something all along. A few moments passed, and 𝕭oa slowly opened her eyes, finding herself in a hammock, her body tightly bound. Confused, she turned to Tougo, asking what had happened, but before he could answer, 𝕻 jumped in, accusing her of using a charm spell on Tougo. That hit a nerve. 𝕭oa's expression shifted to panic as 𝕬𝕖𝕨 pressed her for answers. What was her plan? Tougo, trying to make sense of it all, chimed in. Was 𝕭oa in some kind of hurry? After all, she'd rushed to propose a nude sketch, slapped a charm spell on him, and drained all her magical energy in the process. It lined up with the events from yesterday, and 𝕭oa, cornered, finally spilled the truth. She wasn't who they thought she was a spy. Her mission? To gather intel on the Red Dragon. Her original target had been 𝕻blad Redguard, and her plan was simple. Charm him at the royal castle party and extract information. But then, everything went sideways when an unsuspecting boy, Tougo, looked directly into her eyes, triggering the charm spell. From there, everything spiraled. Her job at the castle? A lie. The creepy stalker story? Another lie. Even being forced to stay at the inn? All part of her cover. 𝕭oa had hoped to hide at the Redguard estate and complete her mission, but she didn't expect to be dragged to a forest. Now, her mission was a bust. Worse, she was shocked to discover Tougo's unusual resistance to her magic. The charm spell should have worked, but instead, Tougo just sat there, obsessively drawing. She thought she'd caught an easy target, but it turned out she was dead wrong. Fed up, 𝕻 demanded she reveal who sent her, but 𝕭oa, ever the slippery spy, wasn't about to give up her employer. In one swift move, she broke free from the ropes binding her, leaving everyone stunned. Even 𝕬𝕖𝕨, a former knight. Before anyone could react, she darted toward Tougo. It looked like she was about to strike, but instead, she gently stroked his head, apologizing with a regretful smile. She told him goodbye, saying it had been fun. Tougo, however, wasn't ready to let her go. He pulled her hand away and asked her to stay just a little longer. He still wanted to draw her, but 𝕭oa refused. Staying wasn't an option, for Tougo or for herself. She trembled as she explained. If she stayed, her walls might crumble. Her heart, long dead to survive as a spy, might awaken again. Tougo didn't back down. He told her to stop being a spy and live in the forest. But 𝕭oa laughed, explaining her job paid far too well. Sure, she liked the forest, but she liked money too. The life she lived, filled with luxury, was addictive. Her heart's poison. If she stayed, she'd want both, peace and wealth. That was impossible. That's why 𝕭oa has to leave this place. 𝕭oa remembered Tougo's words at that time: if human hearts consume waste to live, then her heart has long been starving and is dead. Amidst that despair, Tougo told 𝕭oa to do both, saying it was fine to want both. He suggested she could live in the forest and still make money. His solution? She could be his exclusive model. 𝕭oa froze, torn between her boss's advice to always kill her true feelings and the warmth stirring in her chest because of Tougo. For the first time in years, she felt alive. She smiled warmly, her heart betraying her as she considered his offer.